IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Wednesday. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. Y'all know who we are. We're going to change things up a little bit. Yesterday, I told y'all we would have a defensive conversation today. I'm calling an audible, Ryan, because I want to kind of stay on offense this week, cover a few different topics on the offense this week, and then next week we'll focus on the defense and see how that, just kind of dive into that. So what we're going to talk about today is what we were going to discuss tomorrow, which is the position battles, because I think this is going to be a fascinating conversation this spring and really heading into the fall, because there's a lot of guys that are going to play, but there's battles in regard to, okay, are you 1? Are you 2? Are you 3? There's obviously starting position battles coming out. There's battles that could determine what the personnel groupings are going to be primarily utilized this season, which, we kind of broke those down yesterday. And so I think there's a lot. And then who wins some of these battles, Ryan, and we'll discuss this specifically when we get into each category is, if player A wins this battle, okay, you're good there. But if player B wins this battle, you could be really good because it means a younger guy had a breakout. And that's always one of the fascinating things that you see in the spring is there's going to be some guy that we're not really going to talk about a lot today that's going to have a great spring, maybe a great fall camp that's going to put himself in position to be a guy. And that's one of the things I love about this time of the year, Ryan, is this is going to be our first chance to see what this 2023 football team is going to look like. And these position battles are one of the more entertaining aspects of really watching this team form. And I'm very much looking forward to that.
Well, I think most people are looking most forward to the offensive side of the football, especially, they have a lot of high expectations for it. And I think the reason that people have so much high expectations is because there's so many possibilities that can happen. We're talking about Notre Dame being 4 to 5 deep, maybe even more at running back. You're talking about wide receivers that being able to rebuild that depth chart in such a short amount of time and so many different possibilities. You're talking about 4 to 5 guys that could potentially be a starting guard for Notre Dame next year. So I think everyone just in general from a fan perspective is really excited about the offense because it's been a little lackluster offensively, over the last couple of years. I mean, you're coming off a year where you averaged 31 points per game, right? But now you're taking the opportunity where you think that Notre Dame could take a massive jump on the offensive side of the football. That side of the ball obviously sells tickets. We always know that, right? People want to watch touchdowns. They want to see high-scoring games, as long as they're on the right side of it, And I think that is a really interesting conversation because there's so much potential with the offensive side of the football, but it could look a few different ways, It's not like 100% this is the lineup that's going to be in game one. This is the lineup that's going to be the full season. This is what this player's production output's going to be this year. There's a lot of unknowns, which makes it fun, exciting, but also, it's one of those things where we have to try to figure out some sort of a semblance of understanding because it's going to be exciting regardless. But I think there are a lot of questions as far as who's player one here, who's a key role player here, who's a guy that maybe gets phased out a little bit, as far as the competition for a starting role. All those things are about to unfold in front of us. And I think the offensive side of the football is one that people will have their close eyes on because they're just excited about what Notre Dame can be offensively this year.
There's two that we're going to discuss right away, Ryan, and we're not going to spend as much time on those and for different reasons, and we'll explain why. The first one is quarterback. I feel like I've been torn and back and forth on whether or not I want to even discuss quarterback for a host of reasons. Reason number one is I feel like it's almost a bit clickbaity-ish to talk about the quarterback position battle and to focus on that this spring because, look, the reality is that Sam Hartman's not being brought to Notre Dame to not start. I mean, that's just the expectation. And I feel like pushing Tyler Buchner into this conversation, it's partly, okay, you're just doing that because quarterback battles sell, right? That's like for me. But then the other part of it is, Ryan, is yes, that's what Sam Hartman's being brought here to do, but I'm still a believer in Tyler Buchner's talent and potential, right? And so I'm really torn on how much to even talk about this as a battle. And part of, if Tom Urias was still here, it's no doubt we wouldn't be talking about quarterback at all. But I think the fact that there is a new offensive coordinator and there is a new quarterback quarterback's coach gives me just a little bit of pause to say, well, what are we going to see from Tyler Buchner? I'll say this, Ryan. I do believe that Sam Hartman is going to be the starting quarterback next year. That's statement number one. But statement number two is I think Tyler Buchner is too talented to just dismiss as a potential option as well. And if Tyler Buchner is going to have a chance to be the starting quarterback in the fall, it's going to have to happen in the spring. If he doesn't just flat out outplay Sam Hartman from start to finish of this spring, then it's not going to really be a battle in the fall. And it's no different than last year when it was him and Drew Pine. Drew Pine needed to outplay Tyler Buchner the entire spring to even have a chance, and it wasn't even close. According to every source I have inside the program, and then my guys like you and Sean and Vince that were at the practices last year. Fortunately, I'll be able to be there myself so I can see it with my own eyes this year. But so that's where my concern is, Ryan, is part of me wants to say, look, this is going to be the starter. But then I just feel like, but man, I'm writing off a kid that I think has loads of talent. And I'm really curious to see what Tyler Buchner's attitude is going to be like this. But I don't mean attitude is in like, is he going to have a good attitude, bad attitude? Just like, does he kind of say, okay, this is going to be my learning year and I'm going to learn and take advantage of that? Or does he come in and say, screw that, I don't want to learn right now. I want to battle and compete. And I'm hoping that he wants to battle and compete because I think it's going to make him better. I think it's going to make Sam Hartman better. But that's why kind of quarterback is just one that I'm having a hard time determining just how much I want to talk about it, because we do think we have an idea of who the starter is going to be. It's going to take something extraordinary for him not to be that guy.
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I'm going to be watching is, obviously you want to see Sam Hartman developing the chemistry with the wide receivers and taking command of the huddle and, learning the offense, all that great stuff. But I mean, my biggest thing that I want to see, and you kind of hit on it a little bit, is that I want to see how Tyler Buchner responds to this. I want to see how he responds to this competition, because he's coming off a year where he was the starting quarterback. Every game that he played in, he started for Notre Dame. And if he didn't get hurt, this might be a completely different situation right now that he would be sitting in. But unfortunately for Tyler, injuries happen. It happens. And now you're in a different situation. And now it's all about how you respond. It really is. And it's not even so much as responding to trying to win the starting job, which I'm sure Tyler is going to be up for. It's going to be how you respond in a day in and day out setting of understanding that, hey, man, we're in a competition, but I also need to understand that, like, I need to get better, right? Like, not even get better just to win the starting job, but like, I lost development time. I need to get to that point, because this isn't the end potentially for Tyler Buchner at Notre Dame if he doesn't win the starting job. There's still time, right? Like, this isn't an end-all, be-all, one shot and you're done type of situation. But Tyler needs to make up for some lost time.
Right.
And he needs to be pushed by Sam Hartman. He needs to push Sam Hartman, but he needs to understand that, like, hey, man, I need to control what I can control. I need my self-growth every single day. And if the chips fall in my favor at the end, then the chips fall in my favor at the end. But at least I know that I didn't shy away from that competition, because that is so important at the quarterback position, that you need to have a young man that is willing to say, I don't care who's around me, man. I don't care what you're going to do. I'm going to take care of myself day in and day out, be the best version of myself, and lead this offense when I get my opportunity.
Because you kind of feel like there was these things that would kind of linger last year that people would say, well, Drew Pine's the real leader of this group, and Tyler's this and Tyler's that. And not that he wasn't respected by his teammates, but he just was a different kind of cat. I feel like if Tyler comes out here this spring and just battles his butt off, not only does it make him better and Sam Hartman better, but I feel like that's something that could kind of win over his teammates a little bit. Not that he needs to win them over like they don't like him, but win him over as in, hey, this guy's a warrior. This guy's one of us, right? Which, from what I've been told, is he's a bit of a shy, quiet kid off the field, spends more time with his girlfriend, and which is totally fine. I mean, heck, I would have been that way if I had a girlfriend in college too. Luckily for me, I was wise enough to avoid that during football season. But, I think it's one of those things could really sort of help him win over his teammates to a degree. Yeah. And I think that's part of it too. But the other thing too, Ryan, is, we're sitting here talking about this guy's the projected starter and we expect him to be the starter. And I fully anticipate Sam Hartman to not only be the starter, but to have a phenomenal year at Notre Dame this year. I really do. But here's the other reality of that. He's not the most talented quarterback on the roster. He's not. Tyler Buchner is. And so those are the aspects of it you look at, Ryan, and you say, if Tyler hits his peak, this becomes a really interesting conversation. No question, because the point about the injury that's important, Ryan, is he didn't just get injured this year. He's played one full season of football in 5 years. That's it. As a starting quarterback. That's it. And so he's lost a lot of development time. So you want him to have that I'm going to battle mentality, but my hope is coming out of the spring, if he isn't the guy, that he understands this is just part of the process. Stay, be engaged, be ready for your time whenever that time comes. Take this opportunity as one to say, hey, I need to learn, I need to improve, I need to enhance this part of the game, because not only was he the starter in every game he played in last year, but he's coming off a game where he was accounted for 5 touchdowns. I mean, he played really, really well. And I think to your point, Ryan, and we've said this before, if he doesn't get hurt last year, I don't think we're talking about Sam Hartman being in this conversation. I think the quarterback they would have brought in would have been somebody to kind of battle for a depth piece. That's what I think we'd be talking about. We'd be talking about more of like what UCLA did with the kid that they got, where it's like he may be the guy until Dante Moore's ready, but he's not being brought in to do the same things for UCLA as what Sam Hartman is being brought in to do for Notre Dame. Right. And I think that's absolutely the part of this conversation is going to be very interesting. So, but again, I do anticipate Sam Hartman being the guy. I think he's a talented player. I think he is a guy that you put the talent around him that he'll have at Notre Dame this year at every position. Like, he wasn't throwing to bums last year. Like, Sam Hartman's thrown to some good football players. I'm a huge A.T. Perry fan. I'm also a big Donovan Green fan. I think he's raw, but I love that kid's potential. I liked him because Notre Dame actually recruited him a little bit when he was coming out. He was more of a basketball player in high school that was kind of learning to play wide receiver. He's a kid that I like a lot. So he was thrown to some really good players, but he's just going to have so many more of them at Notre Dame. And then he's going to have tight ends and running backs and offensive line and a better defense and all that. And so those are the things you look for. So I do anticipate Sam Hartman being the quarterback, but I'm very curious to see if Tyler Buchner makes it interesting at all for him, because I do think that would be good for Sam Hartman. I really do. And I think it'd be good for the team to see Tyler go out there and compete in battle. So when his time is called, whether it's at some point in time next year, should Sam Hartman get injured, which I hope doesn't happen, or should it be in 2024 that he's ready and he's made himself a better player? Because if Tyler Buchner can learn from Sam Hartman about reading defenses and the importance of footwork and timing and those type of things, and then you add that to his God-given ability and his guts, which he showed a ton of guts in the South Carolina game, that kid's got a chance to be special. And that hasn't changed because of the injuries. It's just the injuries have made you can't just assume it's going to happen. That's really where we're at. The next discussion, Ryan, is running back. And here's where a position we're not going to really discuss today, because at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters. And I know what we've done as a fan base, right? We've kind of broken it down into, there's fans that are Team Audric and fans that are Team Logan, right? And no, Audric should be the guy. No, Logan should be the guy. No, Tyree should be the guy. No, wait till Jadarian Price comes back. Look, the reality is Audric and Logan are both going to be the running backs this year. They're both going to play a ton. And in my view, it should be just like it was this year. Ride the hot hand, number two, actually. But number one is, what concepts are going to work best for you this week, and who runs those the best? Because if Notre Dame has a more diverse ground attack this year from a concept standpoint, and again, I'm not talking about adding 13 run plays. I'm just saying, don't just be duo, 75, 80, 90% of the time. Be more balanced with duo, inside zone, outside zone, maybe some buck sweep, some counters, some things like that. And then maybe this week, look, we're going to run duo a mess this week. So this is going to be an Audric game, an Audric, then a Logan game, right? And Chris Tyree is a change of pace. Or, hey, this is a game where we got to really hit our movement stuff. Well, that's something that I think Logan does better than Audric. Like, I think Audric is a better duo runner, although I think they're both very good at it. But I think Logan's the better zone runner, which we saw in the bowl game, in my view, because he's just a little bit smoother to hit that cutback. Now, they're both good at it. Chris Tyree is the best zone runner they have because he can turn a little crease into a 90-yard touchdown, which we've seen him do before. So I think that those are the things that are going to factor into it, Ryan. So I don't think there's like this battle. I think they both need to stay healthy. They both need to continue to enhance their fundamentals and technique, be more sound. Audrick's got to do a better job of holding on to the football. Logan's got to get a little bit more consistently physical in the pass game, things like that. And so I think those are the things those two need to be worried about. I don't think they need to be worried about who's 1A, who's 1B, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who starts. What matters is, are they both playing at a high level at the same time, and can they ride both of them in the fourth quarter? Because I felt like at times in the regular season, they would kind of use Logan and Tyree early, and then Audrick was sort of the put the game away in the fourth quarter thing. But then I thought you missed some opportunities to use him to really hammer the teams early. In the bowl game, we saw them use both of them in the fourth. We saw them use all three of them in the fourth quarter, third and fourth quarter. And I think that's the way to go. Don't have a first half back, a second half back. These are your dudes. Use them both throughout the game. And I think that's going to be good for Audrick, because I still wonder what his work volume is like. And not that he can't take punishment, but he seemed to, if he got too many touches in a row, his legs seemed to get a little heavy last year. And I wonder if, because he's so muscular, maybe he doesn't quite have the same endurance level that another guy has. I'm curious about that. Or it could just be first year playing a lot in 2 years because he didn't play a ton the year before. And then as a senior in high school, only played like 8 games because of COVID. And he didn't even play full games in most of those because he was so dominant that year at St. Joe. So it could have been something. It could have just been a conditioning thing, Ryan. A guy hadn't played a ton. It could have been that. But I am curious about that. I don't know if you notice the same thing, but at the end of the day, they're all going to play. And that's the key. So I don't even view this as a position battle. Because it's irrelevant to me who takes the first snap. And I think it'll be a different back each game, depending on different matchups. And honestly, you want to keep them all happy? That's exactly what you do. You mix it up certain games. Audrick starts this game, Logan starts this game. And in other games, you start 2 of them. Logan and Tyree, or Audrick and Tyree, because you start the game out 21 personnel. I think that's the way that it should go. I don't think this should be a quote-unquote battle unless one guy is just not having a good spring. That would be the only thing I would say.
Well, I think that the one movement we've seen in the NFL that has trickled down to college football to a pretty large degree is like that there's not a ton of teams anymore that are just like one true bell cow. I feel like you see that more on the college level still a little bit, but man, the game is just going so much more to like a committee approach, multiple skill sets, being able to mesh those things really well. And I don't know why you would limit yourself, right? Like you're looking at it and you're just like, Audrick Estime is that 227-pound hammer that has better feet in the hole than you would anticipate. Logan Diggs has a good all-around skill set to do a variety of things. Chris Tyree has game-breaking potential. If Jadarian Price gets back healthy, then you're like, that kid's another home run waiting to happen in multiple ways. And then you have Jabron Payne, who's another nice all-around back. And then not to mention, not in the spring, obviously, but, in the fall, you're going to get in the summer, I should say, you're going to get a Jeremiah Love coming in as well. So you have so many different skill sets. I think that for me, like if I'm an offensive coordinator, man, I want to take advantage of these multiple skill sets as much as possible. Like 21 personnel, get different backs in the game in different spots. Is there a one running back that really takes the passing game to the next level? Like, is there, I feel like departmentalizing those strengths are the biggest thing for me. And like, I'm a big Audrick Estime fan. I'm also a Logan Diggs fan though. And like, even if I prefer one to the other, it's like, why would I not want that other guy coming in fresh when one guy's getting a little bit run down? Like, I think it's irresponsible to a degree if you have these 3 great assets at running back to just say, nope, I like that guy better. It's my guy. The other guys, I don't care if they're good football players. I just want my guy in the game. No, man. Like, can we get multiple skill sets on the game? Can we make it less predictable what you're going to do offensively? That's what I want to see. And you have 2 studs in the literally combined, what did they run for, like 1,700 yards last year between Diggs and Estime?
Yeah.
Like they were
over 17. Yeah.
Yeah. They were a fantastic duo. So they should play a lot. I need to figure out how I'm going to use Chris Tyree better. So maybe that's something spring that I'm focusing on. But that's not a competition thing. That's a me figuring out offensive identity and starting to lay that groundwork type of thing. All those three running backs should be heavily involved in the offensive attack this year. If it's not, I do think it's a little bit irresponsible not to use their skill sets.
Agree. And I think too is imagine being in a team in the fourth quarter and they're all 3 still fresh. right? I mean, that's where you want to be, not where you wore Logan down and now you've got to ride Audric and Tyree in the fourth quarter, or pick any option that you want to have, right? Well, what if Audric gets hurt? What if he sprains his ankle? And now all of a sudden Logan's worn out, and no, look, use them all throughout the game, keep those guys fresh, and then just hammer teams in the fourth quarter. And that's kind of what I want to see from this unit. So that's that's kind of where we're at the backfield aspect of the position battles. Ryan, are they battles? In theory, yes, but I just don't view them in the same way as others where there's an uncertainty of who's going to be the guy.
Right.
At quarterback, you know who the guy is. It's just whether or not somebody else can just surprise us and beat him out. Another talented player can beat him out. At running back, it's I don't care who starts. They're all going to play. So they're not the same kind of position battles.
I guess one thing that could throw a wrench in is if Jadarian Price was fully healthy, like is he competing for the third volume getter? Is he competing to push for more reps? You know what I mean? But like with him still coming back and getting fully healthy, that's just not really a conversation piece right now.
Yeah. Next conversation, Ryan, I want to jump into is at wide receiver, because to me, there's 3 position battles going on at wide receiver, and I'll even put an asterisk at the end of that they're even battling against other position groups, and we'll get into that. But I think we kind of sit here today and we're kind of thinking, well, you got Colsey, Merriweather, and Jaden Thomas at starting receivers. There's a lot of people think, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's. I could see 2 of those guys not starting, and I could see a scenario where 3 of those guys are not starting. If we're going to be honest about it, right? I think at least one of them starts, potentially 2, and I could see a situation of all 3. But the fact of the matter is, right now, heading into the spring, I don't think anybody has a spot locked down, and I'd say the guy that has the best chance to lock a spot down, based on how the season finished, is Jaden Thomas. But even there, as we'll get into here in a minute, that could get a little bit interesting too. Where I want to start, however, Ryan, at the receiver positions, is the boundary. I think this is the most interesting position battle on offense in the spring for me. So you've got multiple players are going to be in the competition for it, right? You could see Tobias Merriweather there. You could even see a scenario where Jaden Thomas plays there. I hope not. I think last year proved that he's a much better slot field guy than he is a boundary guy. I think it's going to come down to, however, Caleb Smith, the transfer for Virginia Tech, and Deion Colsey. Now, if you look at last year, Ryan, in the games I broke down, Caleb Smith played the vast majority of his time in the boundary. I think he can play all over, and I'd like to see him play all over. But Virginia Tech used him primarily as a boundary guy. And you know what? You get to the point where if Caleb Smith is your starting boundary receiver, you have a pretty good football player there and a significant upgrade over what you had most of last season, because you have a guy that caught 37 passes for over 600 yards, quality route runner, great hands and concentration. I mean, he caught so many balls where it's like the quarterback last year, the kid that transferred from Marshall, was weird. He would throw some dimes and then he would just throw a bunch of, what the heck was that? But when he'd throw some dimes, or maybe Caleb Smith made it look like a dime by how he was able to position his body. And it's great body control, pretty good catch radius, not elite, but his timing as a snatching, fighting for the ball is really good. Because he doesn't get great separation, for me, but he doesn't need it. He's so good at contested catches. He's so good at, I call it boxing out, Ryan, on like stops and comebacks and ends, where he can kind of position himself in between the defender and the ball. He's got kind of a wide upper body, so he's not an easy guy to kind of reach around and knock the ball out of. He does a good job of extending his hands to catch the ball in those situations. So he's a really good, dependable player. And if he's your best W going into the fall, it's an upgrade over what you had, and a guy that has shown he can be a quality football player. And with a quarterback like Sam Hartman, as opposed to what he had at Virginia Tech last year, he has a chance to be a far more productive player than he was at Virginia Tech. He's not a world beater, but he's a really good, solid football player that would, to me, could be similar in production numbers, if he's the guy, to what Miles Boykin did in 2018. 50-some catches, 800-some yards, 8-9 touchdowns. I could easily see him be that kind of player, Ryan. So I think right now, if I were to say, okay, who's the leader in the clubhouse, I'm almost always going to go with the veteran, because that's just how coaches usually do it. Day one, the veteran's going to start. And so it's going to be interesting. But he's going to be battling with Deion Colzie, who is, in my opinion, easily the more talented player, but the less experienced player. That battle, to me, Ryan, is going to be really, really interesting.
Well, and it's fascinating, too, because Caleb Smith's the much more experienced football player, but he's also coming into a completely new situation too. You know, it's like it's not like just like apples to apples and kind of that conversation. Like he's a player that's coming into a new situation. He has to learn the offense. He has to do that kind of transitional stuff. And Deion is a young man that it was tough for him to begin the year last year. You know, having the injury and coming back slowly. And during the later stretch of the season, you're like, okay, I see it now, you know, like Deion's starting to get more confidence, because that was one thing that I wanted to see from him all year was like, get that 6'5", 207-pound athletic wide receiver, get him confident, man, and get that competitive nature, keep working here. Because if he hits his ceiling, man, he has the potential to be special. He truly does, right? And I think that this competition is going to be really awesome to watch, because if I'm Caleb Smith, I'm like, you know, as a competitor, you look at Deion Colzie, you're like, wow, that kid's really good, man. He's really talented. That dude I got to bring my A game every single day. And then if you're Deion, you're like, well, that guy's good. And he's played a lot of football, so he knows what he's doing a little bit. And that's one thing that I lack right now, is that I need to still figure out what I'm doing all the time. I need to get more experience. So I feel like it's a really fascinating battle, because they are a little bit of opposites in their experience, but also one brings something to the table that the other one doesn't really have. You know, Deion's lack of experience, and then Caleb can look at Deion and be like, man, that needs to get my juices flowing a little bit to compete every single day as best as I can. So I think that they're going to push each other to a wide degree, and I'm excited to watch that one. That's actually one of the, on both sides of the ball, that's one that I'm probably most excited to see, because like you said, Brian, there's no wrong answer there. They're both good football players. One has a higher ceiling. I think that's pretty obvious. But at the end of the day, both of those kids can make each other way better for different reasons, which is vital. And ultimately, you can get into a little bit of a market share situation, even if they're both playing well. It's like, hey, man, we can rotate those guys a little bit. Like, it doesn't have to be just one boundary and then a clear backup. Like, maybe they both get a lot of reps. Like, you know what I mean?
Well,
it's
they're
like
both going to play, in my view, Ryan. There's no question they're both going to play. It's not a it better be that way. And I think that Chancey Stuckey is going to be that way. It's, from what I heard, it's what he wanted more of last year. He just didn't get his way. And then, of course, the injury set in and it didn't matter. But if Caleb Smith's the starter, Deion's going to play. There's no question about it. Where I'm at is, I think going into the spring, I'd give Caleb the edge from an experience standpoint. Then Deion has the talent. But here's the thing for me. If you're going to talk about, what are you rooting for? I'm rooting for them both to play well, because to your point, if that's the 1-2 punch, you have the boundary and they're both playing at least good football, you're set at the boundary, absolutely set at the boundary, because they do have a somewhat different skill set in some areas, but there's a lot of complementary skills to them where the differences are sort of, this guy's just a little better at this than that guy is. It's not like you've got Kevin Austin in the boundary on one snap, and then you've got, I don't know, Caleb Smith, or not even Caleb Smith, because they kind of used him like Kevin Austin, but,
Lorenzo Styles or something.
Yeah, I mean,
like
just a completely
different
type of skill set. I was trying to think of somebody from the past. Javon McKinley and Kevin Austin are different players, right? Like, but there's similarities. What you don't want to have is, Kevin Austin and Robbie Paris, we're just completely different skill sets, right? You've got two kids where one guy's better than the other, but there's a lot of similarities. And so, I think those are the things that I look at and say, hey, they're going to be good there if they both play well. But I will say this, when it comes to the boundary position, my hope, and it's a twofold wish, my hope is that Deion seizes hold of this job. Not that Caleb doesn't play well, but Caleb plays well, but Deion says, nope, this is my job. And here's why I say that. If Deion wins this battle, it means, number one, he's starting to tap into that full potential, number one. Number two, and that means, number one means he's going to potentially be a breakout player. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to be really good in the boundary. Number two is the more that Deion's willing to take the W, the more you can then use Caleb Smith in other situations. Because there's some stuff like in 12 personnel, I would be prone to say if Deion's the starter at W, there's going to be times out of 12 personnel, I'm using both of them, one's at X and one's at W, because Caleb does bring some big boy downfield skills to the table that I think could really be effective in certain 12 personnel situations where you want to run some play action downfield shots. You got two big trees on the outside that are strong and thick. And so I think there could be situations where they play together, but I can use Caleb Smith in a lot of different ways if Deion's my guy, my number one in the boundary, where Deion's a W. I mean, that's just kind of what he is. But if Caleb's your one and Deion's quarter playing maybe 35 to 40% of the boundary snaps, I don't know if you can use Caleb Smith as much around other places. So those are really the two reasons that I'm hoping that Deion Colzie ends up winning the job as far as being the guy where, okay, he seized it. Because anytime you have a position battle, Ryan, you want someone to seize it. You don't want anyone to win by default. Right. And if Deion seizes it, I think that makes the receiver core so much better and allows you to do so much more with Caleb Smith.
Well, I was going to say that, and you just kind of hit on it a little bit, that it's the worst case scenario for me that if Caleb Smith wins the job because he wasn't really threatened. You know, if Deion Colzie wasn't up to the challenge and he wasn't competitive and he just kind of shied away from that competition, like that's the worst case scenario, man. Because again, it's no shot against Caleb Smith. He's a talented player. And I do think that if he is the starting boundary receiver, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But for me, it's like Deion needs to play. But if Deion gets like thoroughly outplayed where you're almost looking like Caleb Smith has to play the majority into the boundary, I think that that's a very bad sign that Deion just wasn't up for the challenge, man. Wasn't ready to take advantage of the opportunities in front of him and shied away from that challenge, you know? And I think that for me, I want there to be heavy competition. I want Deion to put his best step forward. I want Caleb to rise to the challenge as well. I just want those two guys to make themselves better, because if Caleb Smith wins the job just because he's a senior, that's really a bad sign for the development of Deion Colzie, in my opinion.
It's either a bad sign for him or a bad sign for the coaching staff that they're kind of still doing the same old.
Yes.
They're just playing the veteran, and that would be a bad sign. I don't think that's going to be the case here. And so I do think that they'll play the best guy, but Deion's got to be the better guy. You don't. Here's the thing fans got to understand. You will play a guy because of his potential. You will, and you should. What you don't do is start a guy over an experienced player because of potential. At some point in time, you've got to prove yourself. And I think that's kind of where sometimes we get a little bit lost in this conversation about, you know, where a guy, well, this guy should play because he's so talented. Well, there's a point in time where you got to prove it to a degree, but then the flip side argument that the issue that they've had in the past in Notre Dame is it's like, how do you prove it if you don't play him at all? Right. And so I think that's kind of where they're going to be. But if Deion doesn't compete with Caleb Smith this spring, it's going to be very disappointing. But I expect him to. I mean, from everything I've heard, I expect him to. And I think you nailed the confidence part early, Ryan. That's the big thing with Deion. He needs to kind of have a little bit of a push. You know, I think Deion's a kind of a quiet, really smart, intellectual kid that maybe doesn't always understand just how good he can be, but also how hard he has to push himself to get to that level. I think last year, with all the adversity he faced, was a little bit of a wake-up call for Deion, and we saw him play with a little bit more swagger late in the year. Now he's got to refine the technique, right? That's the thing that hurt him in the bowl game is he's playing against some pretty good corners, and he wasn't doing a good job getting off press and really battling for the football. That's the next step he's got to take, because he was kind of the guy in the bowl game, and I didn't think he played that well. So again, learning experience for him. Now he's got to take it to that next step. The other position battle, Ryan, is going to be the field receiver. And this one is going to be very interesting, because I think we're all assuming that it's going to be Tobias Merriweather. Now, I think that's who it's going to be. But Lorenzo Styles, if he gets his head on straight, is still a really talented player that could compete with anybody for playing time, and he still has the guy potential, Ryan. And so I'm going to be very fascinated to see this field receiver battle play out in the spring between Tobias and Lorenzo, and to see if Tobias is able to take that sophomore jump that Lorenzo couldn't take. I'm very fascinated by this battle because you have arguably the two most talented returners on the team are the two guys that I think are going to be competing for this X position, and that is Lorenzo and Tobias.
This one's even more fascinating because they're completely different players that you're going for one position, right? Like you said that, Deion Colsey and Caleb Smith, they're different, but they have some similarities that you can kind of fall to, right? That you can point at and say, like, they both do that well. They're both taller guys, physical, catch point guys, all that stuff. Lorenzo Styles and Tobias Merriweather, they're both a little bit, I guess, sleek. We can call them sleek. But besides that, like, they play completely different. I mean, Tobias is a 6'4", kind of long stride guy, can run routes, has a little bit, that like longer stride to him that he can really kind of take people off guard a little bit, working vertically. Lorenzo's more of that 6'1", in and out of breaks, after catch type of dude. He's just a little bit different stylistically. So it's going to be really fascinating because usually you can kind of compare styles really quickly and be like, that guy's just doing that better. He's doing that better. But whoever ends up in the field spot, you're going to look at and say, depending on who wins the starting spot, we're going to ask them to do a little bit something different than maybe what the other guy's going to do, right? Like, you're not going to ask Tobias to do all the same things Lorenzo does. You're not going to ask Lorenzo to do all the same things that Tobias Merriweather does. So I think offensively, from a, just a play calling installation perspective, the offensive coaching staff needs to understand that, like, hey, man, we have two very different options here, and we need to understand what their strengths are, obviously, depending on which way it goes as far as who's the volume getter in that group. But regardless, man, I want this to be a big opportunity for Lorenzo Styles to show me that you could put stuff behind you and now you're ready to compete. Because we know he didn't have a good sophomore year. We know that it was a big disappointment to us and to Lorenzo as well. So now he's in a situation where you're battling against arguably the most talented receiver on the roster. You have to show up, man, and you need to say, like, hey, guys, like, last year Lorenzo was not this year Lorenzo. Like, I need to flip the switch here, and I need to play because Lorenzo's in a situation, Brian, in my opinion, that if he gets overtaken like easily by Tobias Merriweather, he can get buried a little bit. Like, he's going to play, right? But like, he could get buried a little bit as far as like, now you're getting, outdone by a sophomore kid that's younger than you. Like, you need to step up to the plate, man. I'm looking for Lorenzo Styles to show me mental resolve this year, man. Put stuff behind you. Let's move forward. Get your spots. Get your volume. Let's go, man. We know you're talented. There was never any question about that. It was here. It wasn't anything with your athleticism. It was literally just in your mind why you didn't have the sophomore year that people thought you were capable of. Now you're going against a guy that is 6'4", long, has the look of a future NFL wide receiver. Put up or shut up time, man, at this point, Lorenzo. And I hope you have a great offseason, man. It seems like everything that I'm seeing from these videos and such that Lorenzo is putting the work in. That's awesome. Now, springtime, going into the summer and the fall, you need to show that you're ready to compete, and you need to show that you're ready to prove yourself as why everyone was so high on you, including myself, last offseason.
It is going to be fascinating. And again, it's one of those things, depending on how it plays out, is going to impact other positions. And the point being is if Tobias just takes hold of this one and Lorenzo doesn't really emerge, then it just is what it is. Tobias is that guy. If Lorenzo really steps up and gets back to being what we thought he could be, and all of a sudden you're loaded at X. I mean, just loaded at X. You got two dudes. And it'll be part of it be matchups. The other part of it is if Lorenzo gets back on track and Tobias still beats him out, you got a potential star there, but it's a lot like the W. Lorenzo is not just an outside guy. And in fact, now, although here's it, well, I'll say not in fact. I'll say this because it's very fascinating to me, Ryan. Lorenzo Styles is a bit of an enigma to me in that his skill set is really perfectly suited for the X position. He's fast. He is a guy that's not necessarily super shifty. He's a guy you want catching the ball on the run. You want him running crossers, overs, posts, drags, things like that. You know, he's not a guy you're going to say, hey, you're a really precise, Reggie Wayne type route runner. At least not yet. And that's really ideally built for the X. But in his career at Notre Dame, he has looked far more comfortable playing in the slot. And he's been far more productive when he's playing in the slot. And he just, I don't know why that is. I don't know I don't know if it's a lack of coaching, and then that coaching from the previous administration kind of wrecked his confidence a little bit, and then he comes out this year and he doesn't play well early, and I don't know what it is, but to me it's very unique because he looks more comfortable in the slot, but his body and game are really ideally suited for the X. And I'm very curious to see if that changes at all this year, Ryan. Very curious, because that's going to help determine if he can be in this battle. Can he get back? Can he be more comfortable? Because again, the bowl game against Oklahoma State where he played great and we got so excited about, he played the slot at that game primarily.
Yep.
And so he played. Matter of fact, I'm looking at Pro Football Focus right now. He played 53 snaps in the slot that game and 2 out wide. Last year, he played more out wide than he did in the slot. It wasn't by a ton. I mean, it was pretty, pretty comparable. But he played probably about twice as much outside. But it wasn't like the breakdown between like Jaden Thomas and being an outside guy. And so that's the fascinating dynamic to me, Ryan, because you want him to compete outside, but he hasn't shown that he can really be effective there. Where he's been effective has been inside in the slot. Where was his touchdown against North Carolina? Right up the seam. Right? Had a big catch against BYU. Where was it? Right over the middle. Right up the seam. That's just where he's looked more comfortable. Does that change this year, Ryan? That's what I'm really fascinated to see from Lorenzo. Because again, he's comfortable in the slot, but his game. Please disagree with this if you don't share my opinion. His body type and skill set, to me, speed and all that, is really well suited for the outside position. He just seems more comfortable inside.
Well, I think that his skill set works at both spots. Personally, like
I'm not saying it doesn't, and we'll talk about that at Z. But my point is, he doesn't look comfortable here, even though I think his skill set is really well suited for that. I'm saying he's made plays in the slot. We know he can play in the slot. That's not what I'm saying. So I'll make sure that you're disagreeing with the right thing. I'm just saying I think his skill set is really, really well suited for the X, but he doesn't look comfortable there.
Well, so yeah, I just don't think. I think the comfort is just based upon his fractured confidence last year, man. Like I don't know what it was, but literally he had the 50-something yard catch the first play of the season, and it was just
54.
like
yeah.
And I mean, what did that end up being? Maybe like it had to be a high percentage of his total for the season on one play, like literally the first play of the season, which is just wild. But whatever happened after that, man, it's just like not a lot of effort as a route runner, not a lot of effort as a blocker. Drops, obviously, everyone saw the drops that were on film. So I'm just really curious to see if there's just a different type of confidence this spring, because I agree with you that he has the skill set to play well outside. Like there's no doubt about it. He's got that long. I mean, he's 6'1", solid length. He's got good speed. Everything about him says that he could play outside the numbers and make some plays out wide in one-on-one coverage. Like there's no doubt about it. It just seems like he's fractured right now, man. Yeah. And that confidence just is not. It's just not there. And I think that's all it is. Like I guess my point is like that. I don't know if it really has anything to do with skill set. It's more just like, man, when he's not confident, he's just not good. Like that's just where it is, know? It's just like
and Ryan, you do NFL draft stuff. You've seen this over the years. You watch a guy and you're like, boy, this guy's got the perfect skill set for X position, but then you put him there and he just looks lost.
Yeah.
And you're just like, I don't understand this. Well, he didn't play that position in his career. Now you know why his college coaches never put him there. Now, when it comes to Lorenzo being outside, the one thing I don't see him being is a one-on-one outside vertical guy on contested throws. And that's why I don't see him as a full outside guy. And that's where this battle gets interesting. If he starts outside this spring, and we don't know that he necessarily will, but if he starts outside this spring, where he played outside 180 some snaps last year and played in the slot around 80 snaps last year. And you look at him, you say the things he does well, it is a tad limp. There is a bit of a limit to what he can do. He's never been a great contested catch guy. And that's something that you're going to want to do. So him and Tobias combine, like you had mentioned earlier, they combine to give you everything you need at the outside position. It's just, I don't think Lorenzo necessarily brings all of it together. So for me, if you're going to talk about what my hope is, what's best for Notre Dame, my hope is Lorenzo just balls out this spring. Just like the guy that we all keep hearing about from other players and coaches about how talented he is, that guy becomes the norm of what we see at the X. Lorenzo also has a really good spring because then now all of a sudden you're talking about now Lorenzo's competing at 2 positions for playing time. And that's at the slot with Jaden Thomas. Because here's the deal. They're both very talented players. They're the 2 most productive returners on the roster. It's not close from a pass catching standpoint. But they're both better suited in the slot, or at least not better suited. They've both been more productive in the slot. Lorenzo, I think, fits both positions really nicely, kind of equally. Jaden's skill set is much better suited for the slot, in my opinion, where he gives you some 12 personnel route options out of 11 personnel because he's a receiver. There's no doubt about that. If Lorenzo, like to me, Jaden Thomas is the slot. If Tobias and Lorenzo both have great springs, however, I think what you find yourself in a position where you now have 3 guys to play 2 positions. And I think that's where you could really – because, like, look, let's say that Tobias gets 65% of the snaps outside, Jaden gets 75% of the snaps in the slot, and then Lorenzo gets most of the others. Their overall snaps aren't going to be that different at the end of the game. And so now that talking about yesterday, keeping everybody happy, that's how you do it. But that's going to take Lorenzo to have a really good mental spring to be able to play both of those positions at a high level. Because if he can only play the slot, then he's going to find himself not playing a ton because Jaden Thomas brings some things to the table that Lorenzo didn't show last year. Mainly, that guy can block his butt off by the end of the year. And he brings some size and strength to the middle of the field that Lorenzo doesn't. So for Lorenzo's sake, he needs to look comfortable at both because now he can play both. But if he's just going to be a slot, then all of a sudden, okay, you stay in the slot. Now all of a sudden, Rico Flores and Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse are going to get a shot to be that number 2 behind Tobias Merriweather. So I think that adds to just the pressure that's on Lorenzo this spring. You got to argue the best guy on the roster, arguably, at the X spot. Your most proven returner is playing in the slot, right? You got to figure it out because neither of those guys are going to be easy to beat out. But if you're good enough this spring, you don't have to beat them out because you're going to still be playing a ton. And there'll be times you may be on the field first. But I think that's what's going to be fascinating. Lorenzo's spring could impact 2 positions quite a bit, Ryan. Because if Lorenzo doesn't have a good spring, hey, Greathouse, let's get you ready to go, man. Or it could be another position, which we'll get to here in a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really beneficial too. I mean, you already talked a little bit about, the fact that you're affecting 2 different positions, but it's also one of those things where, Jaden Thomas ended the year off as your best receiver on the roster, in my opinion. But I also want him to be challenged, I think we forget that, Jaden Thomas is only going to be a 3rd-year player this year. Like he still needs to be challenged. He still needs to be pushed a little bit. So, the beneficiary of the confidence of Lorenzo Styles is not only just for the offensive play calling, the ability to move him around and to have different type of looks from a wide receiver perspective as far as the different lineups you're putting in there, but also I want Tobias Merriweather as a sophomore to be pushed. I want that to happen. I want Jaden Thomas as a guy that had a lot of confidence in the year to continue to be pushed and continue to push himself to the utmost because I don't think we've seen the best of Jaden Thomas yet. I know we haven't seen the best of Tobias Merriweather yet. I don't think we've seen the best of Lorenzo Styles yet. All those guys need to keep pushing themselves because that's the exciting part is that, yes, everyone's talented, But it's all still pretty unproven, man. Like, are your leading returning receiver? They were both in the 300-something yard range. Like, you need to continue to push these guys because there is a lot of talent, and it's a lot of talent that's very untapped still.
Yes. And that's where the receiver position is a strength and a question mark, which is exactly what we discussed yesterday. There's no disputing the talent. I mean, the fact that we have now gotten into 3 position battles and we've barely mentioned guys like Braylon James and Rico Flores and Jaden Greathouse, who are incredibly talented players, says a lot about what comes back. But as you also mentioned, none of those guys are proven. None of them. And even Caleb Smith and he has over 70 catches and 1,000 yards for his career. But as a fifth-year guy, that's not a ton of production over 5 years. Last year was his biggest amount of production. He had 37 catches for what was like 680-something yards. So the competition to me is going to separate some. We're going to find out who really wants to be great this spring. We're going to find out what kind of attitudes. We know they've got physical talent, Ryan. The question that I have is, what's their mindset? Because you and I both know, Ryan, you watch NFL draft. You can watch the kids on film, and you know that this guy's got all the talent in the world, but he's just going to be a guy in the pros because he just doesn't have. He's just not a dog. He doesn't have the swagger. He doesn't have the compete level. He just doesn't have that. I want to be great. You can see it just screams at you on film. Then you watch him blow up the combine, and you're like, yeah, that was Kevin Austin's issue, in my opinion. Like, Kevin Austin just didn't have that I want to be great attitude, and the film showed it. There were flashes of really impressive play, but he just never had that I want to be great. Like, if he played as hard as like some of the other greats at Notre Dame did, this guy might have been something. Does Lorenzo have that or not? I don't know. Does Tobias have that or not? I don't know. Does Dion? Does Jaden Thomas probably is the guy that showed us that more last year than anybody late in the year. And so that's the question is this competition is going to bring that out of them one way? We're going to know. It's going to, I shouldn't say bring it out. It's going to expose them one way or the other. Right. And what I mean, it's going to expose them as, yes, this is a dude that we can rely on, or this guy doesn't have the dog in him. He doesn't have that want to. He doesn't have that fire to just go out there and be great and whoop everybody's butt across from him. And it's not just the battles we talk about, but it's going to be Rico. It's going to be Braylon. It's going to be Jaden Greathouse. It's going to be the tight ends. It's going to be the 21 personnel. You're going to have all these different factors that are going to be breathing down your neck. How bad do you want this, Lorenzo? How bad do you want this, Tobias? How bad do you want this, Dion? And those are the 3 guys that I have the biggest question marks about because they haven't shown it. In Lorenzo's case, he showed it in year 1, but showed me something completely different in year 2. I don't want to see a guy that knows he's not getting the ball or knows he's not the number 1 or 2 route just jogging off the line like we saw from Lorenzo last year. Yeah. Nothing infuriates me more than that, especially now that you have a veteran quarterback, right? So how good does he want to be? How good does Tobias want to be? How good does Dion want to be? We're going to find the answer out this spring, Ryan. We will. And I'm looking forward to it. And it's one of the more exciting things to me that you're going to see that we're going to see this spring is what's the compete level? Because not only do you have those guys, but you're going against Benjamin Morrison all spring and Jaden Mickey all spring and maybe Cam Hart. Again, I still don't know his injury status, but you're going to be going up against Chance Tucker. You're going to be going up against some guys that can play, and you're going to have to compete in that way too. And I think that's something that helped that 2018 receiving corps so much with Chase Claypool, Miles Boykin. They had to battle against Julian Love and Troy Pride all spring. And as soon as they started winning those battles and beating those guys, you could see their confidence skyrocket. Look, dude, I just smoked Julian Love all day today. I just smoked Troy Pride all day. And then the next day they'd come out and you could just see the confidence growing and growing and growing. That's something I'm really looking forward to seeing this spring. Right. Well,
and the kids that you have questions about what the competitive level is, I would just throw Jade Mickey at him all day and be like, Jade, just talk to him, man. Just talk to him. I want to see how they and honestly, it sounds silly, but like I want to see how those guys respond. Like honestly, I want to see Jade Mickey get in their grill and be like, let's go, brother. Like, I'm right here. What are you going to do? Right. And I want to see if Lorenzo responds. I want to see if Dion responds. I want to see if all these cats respond because that's how you know, man. Like that's between the lines, like one-on-one, like, what are you going to do, man? Are you going to do something about this? Like, are you going to do something? And the real competitors will show up. They won't talk back. they'll just show out and then they'll talk after they make a play. Like that's what the real competitive guys do.
Right. I'm looking forward to seeing how many of those guys Notre Dame has. I really am. Because, hey, look, you and I know some of those freshmen have that.
Yes.
Say, if you don't bring that this spring, those guys are gonna say, fine, you don't want to be that guy? Hey, coach, I want to be that guy. Right?
You don't think Jaden Greathouse is ready for the call up if he gets that opportunity? Like, all right,
I'm warmed up in the bullpen, baby. Bring me in, coach. I'm ready to go. And Braylon James is going to bring some of that top end speed that Lorenzo does. So if Lorenzo doesn't want to bring it, hey Braylon, I only need you to do 4 things. I need you to run go routes, over routes, hitches, and post. That's it, man. That's it.
We're hearing a lot of good things about Braylon James in workouts so far.
Yes.
So,
yes. The athleticism is certainly there. There's no question about it. So those battles are all going to be fascinating, Ryan. And here's another wrinkle to this battle. We could talk about tight end, and I talked about it in there. The reality is they're going to play 2 tight ends, and Holton Stace is going to get a chance to push Mitchell Evans. There's no doubt about it. But I do think Mitchell Evans is the clear leader in the clubhouse. I want to look at this from a different angle. We talked about the tight end briefly. We talked about running back. That's the other part of this conversation is if those receivers don't step up this spring and Holden Stace just goes off and Chris Tyree is just making a ton of plays in the pass game or Jadarian Price is back and he's making a ton of plays in the pass game or whatever the case may be, the coaching staff may say, hey, you guys at receiver don't want to step up and make plays. That's cool. We're going to go 12 and 21 personnel a lot more this year because we have the athletes to do it. I can design plenty of ways to get Chris Tyree to football on screens and jets and reverses and crosses and wheels and things like that. You guys don't want to compete. You guys don't want to get after it. That's cool. I'm just going to play these 2 receivers, these 3 receivers rotate 2 spots. And I'm going to play Holden Stace a ton. And I'm going to play Chris Tyree a ton. And I'm going to wait. And then when Eli Raridan comes back, whenever that is, I'm going to play him more. I'm going to have options. Shoot, I'll go Logan Diggs and Audric Estime in the backfield. And have at it, right? So I that's another interesting spring battle that these receivers have to be aware of, Ryan, you're not just competing against your position group. You're competing against one of the deepest running back rooms in the country because the better they play and the less you make plays, the more convinced these coaches are going to be like, maybe we should do a lot more 21 personnel. Maybe we should do more of getting Chris Tyree moving around the offense because he's making a whole lot more plays than these other receivers are, right? And same thing with tight end. So if Holden Stace and the running backs step up and do really well this spring, that's another layer to this conversation, Ryan, whether it's Jadarian Price. Again, I don't know what his injury status is or rehab status is at that point in time. The point being, it's not like, well, we're going to have to start 3 receivers some way, somehow. Nope. Right. This team doesn't have to do that. They don't have to go 11 personnel. I want to see a lot more of it. But if Notre Dame's running a lot of 11 personnel this year, the coaches are either stubborn or the receivers have really stepped up, which is going to make this team really dangerous. And, I had a chance to see a picture today of the wide receivers in a recent workout, and they look like they're putting in the work. There's no doubt about that. They definitely look like they're putting in the work. Now we got to see what they do when the pads come on and they get out there and there's some live rounds going off. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. But they've got to step up and prove it because it's not just, well, somebody's got to start in the slot. It could end up being, hey, nobody outside is stepping up besides Caleb Smith and Jaden Thomas, so we're going to run a bunch of 12 personnel. Simple as that. 21 personnel and just go from there. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating.
You obviously didn't bring Sam Hartman in to just not throw the football around outside a little bit, right? Like that's why you brought the cat in. And it's so frustrating because if I'm looking at this wide receiver group, man, I'm just like, you all of a sudden went from, scarce last offseason to deep in one offseason, right? Like you still need to get the numbers up a little bit more, but like all of a sudden, man, you're like, there's some dudes there. There's some absolute dudes, but you need to turn it into production at some point, right? Like we saw a little bit of production with a couple of guys last year in spurts, but at the end of the day, Notre Dame is not going to be a team, in my opinion. Like, yeah, they're going to play 12 personnel. They're going to get multiple tight ends on the field. But in order to be the best version of themselves, in my opinion, they need to be able to spread the field more consistently. You know, we saw it last year where everything just got so compacted to the middle of the field where it was just like we're running against eight-man boxes a ton and still doing a decent job a lot of the time. But ultimately, you're making it harder on yourself if you're not able to spread the field. But to your point, Brian, like, what's the point of spreading the field if your wide receivers aren't a threat, right? Like, that's just – at some point, if I'm an overhang defender, you throw out a slot receiver out there and I know he's not getting the football and I know he's not a good football player, he's not making plays, I'm not going to respect that a ton. Like, I'm going to start inching it a little bit more so I can get some of that box action. You need to be a threat, right? And if they're not a threat, it's just putting a body just to have a body out there. But I think that Notre Dame needs them to step up. You need the wide receivers to step up because ultimately – Notre Dame is at its best when they are not a predictable offense. Wow, oh, here comes 12 personnel. The next snap, 21 personnel. Oh, all of a sudden you're in 11, and now you have 3 wide receivers on the field that you know are going to create absolute mischief if you're a wide receiver. And then, oh my God, here we go. Sam Hartman came here for what reason? Oh, now we're running empty all of a sudden, and now there's 5 receivers on the field. Like, that's the stuff, man, that makes offenses go from good to great, from great to elite. You don't want to be predictable. And if the wide receivers step up, Notre Dame becomes a much less predictable offense because now you can throw so many more things out there that we haven't seen as much over the last couple of years. Like, you haven't seen enough 11 personnel. You haven't seen that stuff because there have been some limitations from a development perspective. The wide receivers haven't been ready to do it. I hope that this offseason is a big step forward for this wide receiver room to say, who cares what happened in the past? We're ready to ball out now.
Here's the interesting thing for me, Ryan, is I agree with everything you just said. However, one thing that you and I have discussed in the past is they didn't use 12 and 21 personnel effectively enough last year, especially 21, because 21 gives you, with Chris Tyree, gives you the chance to spread the field more. Last year, 12 personnel with Eli Raridan and Mitchell Evans as the number 2 or Kevin Bauman did not give you the ability to spread the field because you had to spread the field with your 265-pound tight end. Holden Stace is a little different animal. And if you're going 12 and again, this assumes that Holden Stace, for the sake of argument, Holden Stace has a great spring. Him and Mitchell Evans both have really good springs. Mitchell's still your guy, but Holden's like, hey, I'm pretty good. He is more of a pass catcher type to me, where if you put him in the slot, you can do a few different things than you could do with Mitchell Evans last year in the slot, where you were really putting Mitchell Evans in the slot primarily to motion him somewhere to give him some angles to block. Mitchell Evans, to me, is he's really good when he's in attached situations. He can do some stuff in the slot, but what he can do from the slot is more traditional tight end stuff. I'm running Holden Stace up the seams. I'm running Holden Stace on some corner routes. He's going to get there a little quicker. Now, Mitchell Evans runs a good corner route technically, but he gets there a little slower, right? And maybe that changes this year when his foot's healed up and he's got the full offseason. Maybe. I'm just going off what I saw last year. The point being, those are two, like Mitchell Evans and Michael Mayer were the same guy. Michael was just older and better at everything. But like same guy, meaning the stuff you're using for one, you're using for the other, right? There wasn't a lot of variety to their game. To me, Holden Stace is a completely different type of tight end, in my view, than Mitchell Evans, which means there's a little bit more variety. So now my 12 and 21 personnel packages do become ways to spread the field. And so that's where the receivers have to get better, because to your point, Ryan, you can't just be a condensed 7-8 man box all the time. You just can't. You're not going to – you can do that against some teams, but you're not going to beat the majority of the good teams on your schedule that way. You're just not. Yeah, I worked against Clemson. Didn't work against Ohio State. Didn't work against USC. What worked against South Carolina? Yeah, they did some 12 personnel stuff, but what'd they do out of 12 personnel? They got the ball out of the box. They got a ball outside. They motioned guys outside. They spread the field with their 12 personnel. They didn't do it a ton, but they ran a ton of 11 personnel and some 21 personnel in the bowl game. They had South Carolina off balance, and they ripped them up. So, to your point, they need to do that more. They, I think, have more resources to do that more this year at receiver, but also at tight end and running back. And that's what's going to be fascinating to see. And so the point is the tight ends and the running backs also are going to challenge the receivers. And if the receivers answer that call, I am I posted some on the message board the other day. I'm starting to get excited about this offense again now that all the coaching BS is behind us. I'm really starting to get fired up because I start thinking of what this team could be if the receivers step up. They don't have to be Golden Tate 2009. They don't have to be Will Fuller 2015. They just have to be good, legitimate weapons. And you can spread the ball around. Maybe Deion's this game and Caleb's this game and Jaden's this game and Tobias or Lorenzo the other game, whatever. Doesn't matter. But if they're legit weapons with Sam Hartman a quarterback and what they have at the other positions, now you start talking about, okay, this team has a chance to be really good offensively this year. But the receivers, to me, are going to be the key. If they do not step up, then the offense will still be good, Ryan, and it'll be a lot better than last year. But will it be championship worthy? That's a much bigger question mark. Sure. And that's what I'm looking forward to seeing. So there's a ton of potential there, but we want to make sure that we're letting people know that it's like, Ryan, you nailed it. It's a lot of unproven talent right now at that position. Those guys got to step up and take their games to another level. Otherwise, they're going to be the reason that this offense gets held back. It won't be quarterback, won't be running back, offensive line, anywhere else. It'll be the wide receiver position. And hopefully that's not the case. But it's going to make for a very fun spring, Ryan. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. If you had to predict right now, what would you say would be your 11 personnel alignment?
So right now, 11 personnel, I mean, running back, it would be either Audric Esme or Logan Diggs or some Chris Tyree sprinkled in, right? Obviously, Mitchell Evans would be the number one tight end right now. My three wide receivers, I think I do. Right now, I would say for me, Jaden Thomas is absolutely in the slot. There's no doubt about that. To the field, I think Tobias is the guy right now. Or actually, yeah, I'm going to say Tobias right now. And then ultimately, I think it's going to be Deion with Caleb mixed in everywhere. But I think, like you said, I think it's a good point that Caleb Smith's going to get an opportunity to win that spots in the boundary early on in the spring, especially, right? So, but ultimately, when it's all said and done, I do think Deion can take that step to be that guy. So I guess I'm more towards what most people are expecting, but I'll go Deion, Tobias, Jaden at wide receiver, Mitchell Evans, and then whoever your running back is fine with me.
Kind of where I'm at. I mean, Jaden, Tobias, Deion. I think actually, you know what? If I had to say today, I'd say Tobias, Jaden, and Caleb Smith. I got to really see it from Deion. I do. I got to see it from Deion. But I'll say if Deion is starting at W and Tobias is starting at X, and there's no injuries that cause that, you're coming out of the spring, you're going to see me really fired up about what this offense is going to be. I'm just telling you right now, if those two guys win starting jobs,
I think Notre Dame bringing in Caleb Smith, not only just for the depth and the good football player, I think he could be incredibly beneficial to Deion Colzie, man. Like, I think that Deion, if he attacks this thing right, Caleb Smith could be one of the biggest blessings of this offseason as far as getting the most out of Deion Colzie. I really think that could be big for him.
He was a team captain last year, and he just kind of strikes me as the kind of guy. Like, I listened to him in the interview he did with Malik and Sean, and he just strikes me as the kind of guy that understands he's got a role to play beyond just what he brings as a. I don't know. Did you get a chance to watch that interview by chance, Ryan? You should check it out. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it. But he just strikes me as a guy, and this is me reading between the lines and he didn't say it. I don't remember him saying it. This strikes me as a guy that he's going to come in and compete. He wants to be the guy, but he also understands I'm here for a year, and I need to leave an impact beyond just this 1 year. Yeah. Which means I am going to bring those other guys along. I could be wrong on that, but that's just the read that I got from him. And if that's the case, it's going to be impactful, to your point.
He was such a low-risk player, honestly, because, he had production. He brings size. He brings the leadership qualities you talked about. Brian, he also played a ton of special teams at Virginia Tech, too. You're just like I mean, at worst, if he's a guy that kind of plays all over a little bit and gives you some versatility that way, and then also can play special teams and have that leadership quality, like, that is just such a bonus to have, man. Like, he's really a low-risk player, in my opinion. I think that was an awesome get for Notre Dame to get Caleb Smith.
Last one, Ryan. This is going to be interesting. We spent a lot of time talking about the skill players.
Yeah.
There's 2 guard spots open, and there's a lot of guys battling for them. And that's going to be, you may not say this about a guard position, but that's going to be a very entertaining battle in my opinion, because there's so many questions. Does Billy Schrauth break out like everybody's assuming? Does Andrew Kristofic kind of take that next step as a player? Does Rocco Spindler finally kind of figure it out? Does the change of coaching kind of inspire him to say, hey, I got another chance? I've heard that Coach Easton wasn't very high on Rocco Spindler, probably for good reason, right? But sometimes a coaching change like this can kind of ignite a kid like that to come in and say, hey, I got my chance now. Let me go prove something. Does Ty Chan have a jump as a sophomore? Here's a guy that fascinates me a ton, Michael Carmody. I love his physicality. I actually liked what he did in the run game in 2021. He just couldn't pass block on the edge. He just was really not very good in pass pro in space. But as a guard, I think he's got the footwork and the athleticism, but he was down to 280 pounds last year. Can he get his weight back up and play? Because I don't care how strong you are, 280, you're going to have a hard time making it through a whole season. Can he get up over 290 and still move? Those are all fascinating questions, Ryan, and we don't have a lot of answers this spring. But how well that position battle wages and how hard it's fought is going to tell us a lot about just how good this line is going to be. It's going to be a good line no matter what, in my opinion. If you're starting Michael Carmody and Andrew Kristofic, you got two good, solid players at the very least who have started games. Line's going to be fine. Yeah. But if some of the younger guys, the Billy Schrauths, the Ty Chans, the Ashton Craigs, the Sam Pendletons, who is a guy that I'm curious to see how he moves this spring, because he's going to be one of the strongest guys on the interior right away. Yes. How are those guys going to battle? Because y'all better step up this spring, because there's a cat coming in the fall named Charles Jagasol that you may not want to have a lot of questions at guard coming into fall camp when Charles Jagasol puts the pads on. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and Jagasol's going to show up at like 6'6" plus and 325 pounds. He's going to be ready to go, man. To your point, but it is so fascinating because there are so many different combinations that could happen too. It's not even just like this guy's battling for the right guard spot, this guy's battling for the left guard spot. I think it's going to be one of those situations, in my opinion, where it's just like, who are the best two players there? And then we'll figure out who fits it right and who fits it left. That'll be kind of the least of your concerns at that point. You just need to find the two best players. Andrew Kristofic obviously has experience, right? He started a few football games. He's an older player now, as a senior. But you have a bunch of young guys like the Billy Schrauths of the world, the Ty Chan. Ty Chan's the one that I have the most intrigue about, to be honest, Brian, because I think that most people think, as of today, that it's going to be Billy Schrauth and probably Andrew Kristofic, and then maybe that changes sometime during the season. I think that's what most people believe at this point. Ty Chan, though, and I kind of always go back to when I saw him last fall in practice, I'm just like, that's a grown man. I thought he was like a junior when I first saw him, and then I'm like, oh, that's Ty Chan, huh? Wow, he's really filled out. So it's a little bit like the wide receivers. You have a lot of talent inside a guard that are going to be competing for this competition. But at the end of the day, who's going to separate themselves? Who's going to be the competitive person that takes that job? And I really don't care who it ends up being personally. I would love to see Billy Schrauth play, based upon his high school film and everything. I would love to see him play, but I don't care if Billy wins a certain job. I just want it to be two good football players, because it's not like you have two very talented guys and then a bunch of talent, right? You got a few guys that you're like, they could play at Notre Dame. They could start at Notre Dame, including a couple of guys that have literally started games at Notre Dame. Right. So, we're talking about the battle between 6'4", 300, 6'4.5", 300, 6'5", 300. They're all equally talented, right? And that's why it makes it so interesting, because I think that there's so many different combinations that it could end up being. I'm honestly a little bit unsettled just trying to predict who it's going to be. I have no idea who it's going to be. It could be so many different combinations, but at the end of the day, Notre Dame has stockpiled a lot of talented offensive linemen. And I think you feel like as long as it's developed properly, Notre Dame's going to be good at guard next year. It's just who is the players that are going to kind of put themselves in the forefront.
I will say this. I don't care. I agree. I get where you're coming from, and I agree with you. As long as two guys win the job. I will say this. I am somewhat hoping that Billy Schrauth wins a job because he's the most talented guy they have. I mean, that's my only thing there is you're right. If he doesn't win a job and somebody beats him out, that guy probably had a pretty good spring, right? But if Billy wins the job, and again, not starts, but wins the job, it's a difference. Somebody's got to start. You got to play 5 linemen, right? With the exception of one play during the Lou Holtz career in the practice, you always have 5 linemen on the field. Still one of my greatest Lou Holtz stories. I've told you that one, right, Ryan? But somebody's going to start. But are you starting because you earned it? Or are you starting because of the questionable production we had at the position? You were the best, of that group, or you were the least bad, right? I mean, you're still going to put dudes on the field. My hope is that he wins the job because you kind of start thinking like, okay, has the legend become bigger than the talent? That can happen sometimes to younger guys. And so I go back last week and I watched Billy Strauss high school film again. I'm like, yep, okay. That's why I had him as a top 100 player. That's why I had him as a dude coming out of high school. And you remember the size, the length, the power, the athleticism, the demeanor. Like he was really the only guy in last year's class that reminds me a lot of this year's lineman. Like Ty Chan's strong and physical, but like he was, he put on weight fast. He misses. He was good, but he wasn't quite the destructive force that Jagasol and Pendleton and Sullivan Absher were this year. Billy Strauss is that. And so I'm curious to see what he's going to do. And then the wild card for me really is Michael Carmody. I don't know if you ever had a chance to watch him coming out of high school. He was a guy that was really raw because he played basketball, right? He was on it. Him and his brother were part of a basketball team that went to, I think, the state semifinals, state championship game. And so, he doesn't have a typical 300-pound body, but I think he can get to close to that. But can he maintain his athleticism? Because he's got a lot of potential if he can get the weight and strength where it needs to be. He's athletic. He's got naturally powerful hands, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He moves really well. He's long. He's got the length to play left tackle. He just doesn't have I wouldn't even say he doesn't have the footwork to play or the foot quickness, but I just don't think he looked comfortable in space, Ryan, was the thing for me. And his technique was a hot mess last year or in 2021 at tackle. Like he wasn't getting coached at all. And so he had a chance to play some center this year. I'm really fascinated to see what he can do too. Those are the 2 guys that I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to because, I mean, we know who Andrew Kristofic is, right? If Andrew Kristofic's starting, you're solid there. You're good there. You're fine. But I'm really curious to see those other 2 guys and see what they can kind of do this spring from for different reasons. But I'm really fascinated to see what those guys are going to do.
I remember the first game 2021 where Carmody got pushed into, playing time. There was one rep in the run game near the goal line. I forget who it was against, man, but he took this dude into the bleachers on this one run. I was like, oh, who the heck is that kid, man? So yeah,
I think it was Purdue, wasn't it? And it was a home game, wasn't it? I think it was. I thought it was Purdue.
You might be right.
I could be wrong.
I can't remember. I just remember he took someone through the end zone on a drive block, and I was like,
"No, it wasn't Purdue because they didn't have a short touchdown against Purdue, Ryan. So it wasn't that. So sorry, but yeah,
you're fine.
Get back to what you were saying.
No, I mean, it was just that was a moment where I was like, I don't know who that kid is, but that's impressive stuff. I think he was a redshirt freshman at that point, right?
Yes,
and it's just,
he was.
And you look at it and you're like, that's eye-popping. But then, like you said, he's not a natural on the outside. Like he just wasn't. He wasn't comfortable. It wasn't a body type issue. It was some guys are just they have a demeanor, right? And their demeanor is to play in tight spaces, or demeanor is to be comfortable playing in larger spaces. And some guys just aren't comfortable playing in increased space, and that's fine. You need guys that play in tight spaces, in a phone booth, like whatever terminology you want to use there. Regardless, man, he's an interesting cat. There's no doubt. I'm interested to see if Kristofic, after a year of, you were starting games in 2021, and then you were kind of just a key reserve inside in 2022. What's your competitiveness like this offseason, right? Are you like, dude, like this is my last chance? Like this is all I got, because otherwise I got redshirt freshmen coming from behind me that are like pretty dang good football players, And so I hope that a couple guys just kind of take hold of it, because otherwise I feel like I'm just going to be waiting until Charles Jagasaw gets there in the summer, and like I don't care if he wasn't here in the spring, give him a shot type of thing, know. So it's going to be interesting though, man, because I think there's so many different layers to this conversation Because, yeah, like Billy is talented enough to start for Notre Dame, but is he ready to hit that opportunity full throttle and to take advantage of it, right? How much does Sam Pendleton play into this competition? I mean, he's 6'4.5", 300 pounds coming in already, man. Like, he's physically ready to play, but is he ready to play comparative to the other players that are on the roster? There's so many different headlines, I think, inside, which is why it's going to be super entertaining. It's really funny because you have the two offense. Usually your eyes go to the offensive tackles because that's the sexy positions, right? But you're just kind of like, yeah, Joe and Blake, they're there. Zeke Correllison at center. Who's going to be starting at the other two spots, though? And we're talking about what, 5 or 6 guys that could be starters inside at guard. It's going to be fascinating, man. It really is.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they're going to be able to do next year. I really am. There's, like you said, Ryan, there's some dudes. There's definitely some dudes there. It's just about whether or not they can be the guy. That's gonna be the key. So very much looking forward to the guard battle because look, and that's kind of we've talked about this before too. Ryan, is you want to be in a position where you're not relying on this guy needs to step up or we're in trouble. You don't want to be in those situations. You really don't. That's when you can get in trouble as a football team. Is boy, if this guy, man, I really hope that Billy Schrauth steps up because if not, the next best option is someone who just we don't think can play. That's not where they are. And it's a good place to be. You want to be in a position where, man, like you said, to start the whole thing off, I don't care who starts because they're all good players. And that was kind of where where you took it was that right there is I don't really care who starts. And you get to that point in time, you start feeling pretty good about where you are. So I'm looking forward to that one. Very much looking forward to it. Oh, it was Carmody did that to Jermaine Johnson.
That's what it was,
Yeah.
man. I was like, because I remember he did it against a good player.
I'm watching the highlights. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they had an initial bit of a, he kind of didn't move his feet at first in a typical Jeff Quinn offensive line fashion. He just kind of caught Johnson and then started to push him and just pushed him right into the end zone and buried him. Yeah. So yeah, it was, I remember that play now.
That's a pretty nice early play, man, against a future first round pick. So not bad.
Yeah, no doubt. So that's going to do it for the position battles, Ryan. I think it's a very interesting conversation. There's going to be a lot of different ones to look at this spring. I mean, just a lot of different battles. And then, who's that guy that we didn't talk about today? Is it Ashton Craig? Is it Pat Coogan? Is it Tosh Baker somehow? I mean, is it Kevin Bauman breaks out at tight end? Is it who is that guy? Is it a freshman at receiver that just is like, sorry, dudes, I'm sorry. I know you guys are veterans and all that, but sorry, I'm taking this. That's what's going to be. That's what I love about the spring and something I'm very much looking forward to on the Notre Dame offense. And hopefully those guys are given the opportunity. That's going to be a big part too, Ryan, is this new staff going to be like the old staff and just play the veterans, or are they going to play the best players? Or give the young guys that have more talent the opportunity to prove themselves to be the best player. That's going to be a very interesting part to this whole dynamic. So that's going to do it for that part of the show, folks. We're going to go on to mailbag next. Before we do, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, we would love a 5-star review. We greatly appreciate those. And if you have not done so, sign up for the CFB Nation podcast app as well, and check out the CFB Nation YouTube channel. The guys have a new show up today. They talked about Texas's quarterback situation, Arch and Quinn Ewers. They talked about quarterback transfer portal that they expect to happen in May. Talked about just some quarterback battles for the spring. So you definitely want to check out the Bill Bender and Bill Trocchi of Sporting News. They had that show, and they had somebody, Chris Hummer from 24/7 Sports was their guest today to talk about those things. So Chris joined them. They're having a lot more guests on this summer, just looking at different teams. Yesterday, we published it today. They looked a little bit more at Texas. And so very interesting stuff, very, very fascinating stuff. And I always encourage people, you can't know if Notre Dame is here in regard to building to be a championship team if you don't know where everybody else is. And that's why I say it's important to make sure you're staying locked in with what other teams are doing as well. And if we got this cool merch. Ryan and I both got, his hat's available in the store. I got this one, got the polos, all those different things. If you haven't bought any gear from Irish Breakdown, check it out. We have our merch store down in the bottom. If you have signed up for the message board and never used it, you got an email from me with a 10% discount or a 20% discount in the entire merch store. If you're thinking about signing up for message board at Irish Breakdown, boards at irishbreakdown.com, and you'd like some merch stuff, don't buy merch until you've signed up for the message board. Because if you sign up for a monthly membership, you get 10% off your entire next purchase. If you sign up for an annual membership, you get 20% off your entire purchase. If you join the Shamrock or Blue clubs, which are sort of our booster clubs, you not only get the membership and the discount, but you also get a free IB Club mug. If you sign up for the Gold Club, which is the highest level, you get the annual membership. You will also get the 20% discount to the entire purchase, and you will get a IB Club mug and an IB Gold Club shirt that is only goes to people who are in the club. I don't have one. Ryan doesn't have one. Vince, Sean, the other Sean, none of us have that. It only goes to members of the Gold Club. And so you'll definitely want to check that out. It looks like this. You can get it in different colors, and then underneath it says Gold Club and our typical the font that we use for our different stuff. So definitely want to check that out as well. And you find that at the Irish Breakdown store. And as always, thank you for listening to the Irish Breakdown podcast. It's mailbag time, Ryan. We're not done yet. It's mailbag time. We have a few in there. If you guys want us to answer your questions, go ahead and get them in now. Because right now we have 10 questions starred. And then John A1 starts us off, Ryan, of course. And he says, is there going to be a battle of tight end? Seems like it's Evan's job to lose type situation.
Well, I think that, John, in theory, I think that there's always a competition, right? Like, I think that breeds greatness. So is there a competition? Yes, I would say so. Does Mitchell Evans have a little bit of an inside track on it? Yes, I also believe that, right? But I'm hoping that Holton Stace comes into this preseason and into this spring and is ready to go, man, and wants to be the guy. Because ultimately, the great thing about the tight end position is Notre Dame does play a lot of 12 personnel. So there's a lot of opportunity to get two tight ends on the field. You don't have to just have one guy on 100% of the snaps. That's the only volume getter at tight end. So I think that Mitchell Evans does have the inside track to being the top tight end on the depth chart. But certainly, I think that he had 3 catches last year, right? This isn't like a Mitchell, you're good, man. This isn't like the Michael Mayer treatment where it's like, we don't even need to see you in spring, brother. Like, you're good. Like, we need to see you, Mitchell. You need to compete. There are other talented guys behind you. It's just that Mitchell Evans did have a nice ending to the season. He has had experience, so he has a little bit of the inside track. But guys like Holton Stace are certainly going to play into that competition.
Yeah, I'm with you, Ryan. It can be both. It can be a battle, but still his job to lose. And I think that's where we are at this point in time. Here's an interesting one from Bailey Brad. He's got 2 interesting questions about the season. And his first one, Ryan, says, would you guys be happy with a 10-win regular season?
No, I wouldn't be happy, Bailey Brad, because, at this point, man, I've said this a lot. Look, double-digit wins is the kind of the baseline for me. Like, you need to get there, right? Like, you need to get there. But Notre Dame, for me, at this point is you need to start competing for national championships. You need to start making the playoffs. A 10-2 regular season isn't a bad season, obviously, right? Like, winning double-digit games in a season is not a bad season. Would I be incredibly upset if you go 10-2? No. But would I be happy about it? I don't think so either, right? Like, it's an in-between ground for me. Notre Dame needs to be 11-1, 12-0 to have a chance to win a national championship in about 99% of seasons. So that is where I think Notre Dame needs to be here, is that competing for playoff spots, competing for national championships. That's where I need to be in order to be happy, I guess is the best way to put it. So would I be happy? No, I wouldn't be happy. Would I be like, everything stinks, I hate life? No, I wouldn't be that degree either, right? It's still not a bad season, but it still needs to be the standard now is that you need to compete for national championships.
My feeling on it would somewhat depend. First of all, would I be happy? No. My feeling below that would be depend on who they lost to and how they lost. And, it's kind of like there could be some moral victories, if you beat Ohio State and you say beat USC, but you lose to Clemson and a barn burner, and you lose to, I don't know, you get upset by Duke the week after. Okay, I'm not happy about it, but you showed some progress. I'm just at the point now where I'm just, like you said, I'm tired of the moral victories. You just went out and got one of the better quarterbacks in the country. You got a ton of talent coming back. You've got a lot coming back on defense. There's no excuse not to be better this year. I'm sorry. You get 2 of the 3 toughest opponents you have at home. I'm just tired of the excuses. And again, I didn't like the excuses when Brian Kelly was head coach, and I don't want to hear them when Marcus Freeman's the head coach. I'm so over the whole, oh well, they didn't win because of this excuse or that excuse or whatever. I'm tired of it. Get it done, right? Get it done, and this team has a chance to do that. Now, if they go 10-2, does that mean it's a disaster? Marcus Freeman's not the guy. Blah blah blah. No, we're not going to. There's a grown-up reaction to that. It's not good enough. Here's the positives. Here's what needs to get fixed. And you move forward. That's how it needs to be. It's not well, if you don't win a championship, the season's a disaster. Well, that's not that sounds good. That's a good cliche to use to motivate your players. It's championship or bust, but that's not realistic. And it also is disrespectful to the work that your kids did put in and your coaches did put in. You say if they're 10-2, am I happy about it? No. Are there going to be things to build on? Most likely. But then you need to go stink and build on them. That's going to be the big key. And figure out why did we not get there, and then don't make excuses for it. And that's what I don't know about Coach Freeman yet. None of us do, because he just hasn't had enough time to show it one way or the other. Is okay, is he going to make excuses like Brian Kelly did, or is he going to say, I've got to make some tough choices here? Hey, if the defense is not good again next year, I got some tough decisions to make, right? If the offense isn't good enough here, I got some tough decisions to make. And can he make those decisions? None of us know, because, again, I don't want a coach that just fires everybody after one season, right? You got to be careful with that, right? So to me, people talk about got to get the roster right. I think the roster's way better than people realize. Like, somebody put on Twitter yesterday, they were showing the sequence of plays that led to Tommy Reese going off on Drew Pine in the Cal game. It was just a disaster. I mean, the quarterback play last year was so bad for most of the year. And the injuries at receiver, and that team still won 9 games last year against a pretty competitive schedule. Now, it was a disappointing season, but they're a lesser roster is maybe not a bowl team next year with all the stuff that Notre Dame went through last year.
Agree.
And the schedule they went through last year. And so I've said it for a long time. This roster is better than people realize. I said it in 2016. Oh, Notre Dame just doesn't have players. Well, the next year they went 10-3 against 7 or 8 ranked teams on their schedule with the same exact players they had the year before, except they lost some dudes, right? They lost some of their better players. They lost, Equanimous. Well, actually, he came back, but his head still wasn't right in 2017. But they lost some really good players from that 2016 football team that they could have really used that next year, lost them, and still went out and won 10 games. The talent was better than it played. The talent was better last year than it played. And so I don't think the talent is where Georgia is. I've never said that. But I'm tired of the excuses of, well, we don't look like this team, so we can't be this. Oh, we don't have enough 300-plus pound defense. Hey, did you watch Notre Dame and Georgia go toe-to-toe? Did you watch Notre Dame be just as good? They were the only difference in those 2 games was quarterback and wide receiver. And quarterback in both games, wide receiver in the first game. Because the receivers just made a bunch of mistakes and dropped balls and all that kind of stuff in that game. But Georgia didn't overwhelm Notre Dame in the trenches. There's this thing, well, this is what I see from Georgia and Bama, so this is what Notre Dame has to be. And that's never been true. They're a different type of team. Stop buying in the excuses about the roster's not there. That's what Brian Kelly was great at. He was great at convincing Notre Dame fans that the roster wasn't where it needed to be. And it was BS then, and it's BS now. Because again, they don't play Georgia in the regular season. They don't play Alabama in the regular season. They don't play those teams where you need these 330-pound monsters to be good. You don't need that against Clemson. Look at what they just did to Clemson last year. You think the reason you didn't beat USC because you didn't have enough 300-pounders in the lineup? You can argue maybe that was an issue for you in the fourth quarter against Ohio State, but your issue against Ohio State in the fourth quarter was your offense, not your defense. And so I think the roster's there. I just think they need to put it all together and stop making excuses, Ryan. That's the thing I'm tired of is just, well, but. No more buts. Get it done. Get it done. That's what I want to see. And I believe Marcus Freeman has that attitude. I do. I just want to see it play out that way. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Do you think the roster's – I mean, again, is the roster where Georgia is? No, I'm not saying that. But they don't play Georgia in the regular season this year.
I mean, I think everything – yeah, I mean, I think there's context to everything. Like, yeah, you need to constantly keep improving. But, like, I've always been on the wavelength, and I fought back tremendously on a lot of people that, just go with Notre Dame has no speed. Notre Dame has this. I'm just like, that's not true. Like, it's not. There's been some parts that have held it back. There's no doubt about that, both coaching and players in certain spots. But Notre Dame has enough talent to compete for a national championship, man. Like, they do. I've always thought that over the last few years. It's just there's been some parts of the team, and I say team is to encompass coaching and playing at all of the spots. There's been some spots that just haven't been good enough. I think we see that perfectly eye to eye.
Or coached good enough,
Correct.
To your point.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Here's a follow-up to that a little bit from Jason Smith. Does 10-2 with really close losses feel different than just 10-2 and barely competitive in the two losses? Big time. And that's kind of what I meant by who do they lose to and how.
Right.
Like if you go 1-2 against Ohio State, USC, and Clemson, let's say you beat USC and you lose to Ohio State in a barn burner and you lose to Clemson in a hard-fought game, there's no shame in those things. In regard to those are things you can say, hey guys, you're progressing. Because Brian Kelly was never competitive in those games, right? So it's progress, but it's still not good enough. I'm sorry, you're Notre Dame. You should be beating Ohio State at home. I'm sorry, you just should. Is it easy? Heck no, it's not easy. But if you're the kind of program you say you are, then that's something you should do, correct? And so, I want to see those things. But if that's how you lose, I'm disappointed in 10-2. But I'm also encouraged by you made a progress. You made progress. Now it's go make more and win that game next time. I think those are the things that I look at and say, yeah. And I just, yeah.
It's also
and anyone saying 9-3 is the minimum. Get out with that, please. Get out with that. Don't give me stuff about staff turnover. They had less staff turnover this year than they had last year. They've lost 2 coaches. We're acting like three. They lost 3 coaches from last year's staff. We're acting like Notre Dame turned over their entire staff. 3 coaches. They bring a whole lot more back this year than they brought back last year from the coaching staff, Ryan. So I don't understand what this.
They brought back 70% of their coaching staff. Yeah.
Last year they brought back what? Tommy Rees, Mike Mickens, Chris O'Leary in the same roles they had the year before. That's it, right?
Yep.
And then you had Marcus Freeman got promoted to head coach. He had 7 new assistant coaches last year. 7. You're gonna have 3 this year. That's it. So no, I'm sorry. 9-3 because of staff turnover is not acceptable. I'm sorry. It's just not. It just isn't. So that means you lost to every good team you played, basically.
Yeah. I love that the fan base is now also looking at it like how many people were so negative on Tommy Rees as the offensive coordinator. Now it's like, oh my God, we lost Tommy Rees. I'm just like, come on, man, be consistent.
Yeah.
Like just be consistent. I mean,
seriously,
it's kind of where we are. But I mean, I think that for me, I'm right there with you in the fact that it was disheartening for a few years under Coach Kelly when you were beating everybody you should have beaten, and then it would kind of get your hopes up a little bit that like this is the year, man, where they're going to beat one of those big teams, right? One of those top-ranked teams. And then every single time just about wasn't even a competitive football game in the end. It just wasn't. And this past year, right, 9-4, disappointment, no doubt. We've talked about it a ton.
Yeah.
But you still clobbered Clemson, a talented team. You were in the game with Ohio State in the fourth quarter. You could have won that football game
more
potentially.
Than they led in that game, by the way.
You were competitive against Ohio State. And then, honestly, USC ended up being an 11-point game. But, like, if you watch that game, they're, like, 1 or 2 plays away from that being a completely flipped game, like, at that point. So,
I will say this. That was the one team that outplayed Notre Dame from start to finish was USC. Well, let me rephrase. Marshall to a degree. But Notre Dame took a fourth-quarter lead against Marshall and had 2 possessions to break it open. USC is the one team that just Notre Dame never – like – to your point, Rand, there were a couple plays that if they go differently, it's a different ball game. but they never went differently.
Right.
Like against Stanford, you could say, hey, you had a fourth quarter lead. Against Marsh, you had a fourth quarter lead. Against Ohio State, you led up until less than a minute to go in the third quarter. Against USC, I don't think Notre Dame ever led that game.
I don't
Like
think so.
USC scored on their first possession and Notre Dame didn't. I mean, they never led that game. That was the one team to me that outplayed Notre Dame start to finish, in my view. Shouldn't have, but they did.
Sure.
And you had bad game plans, especially on defense. Early game plan against USC I didn't like on offense. I thought the offensive game plan got better into the game. Defensive game plan just was bad, never got better. I mean, just they never adjusted in ways that were effective.
And meanwhile, the one game during the Kelly era where we're like, yeah, we beat a ranked team is like Clemson without Trevor Lawrence, Tyler Davis, like a lot of premier players, right? I'm just like, yeah, things are changed around here, man. Is it going to be end all be all like national championship level? Is it going to be consistent? I don't know. I'm not sure, but I think it can be. And I think at least the change was needed at the end of the day. The change was needed.
Yep. Next, go to the next question here. We got some more we got another one from Bailey Brad that I want to bring up, Ryan, and that is, okay, how about this? Which game is more important for Notre Dame to win this year, Ohio State or USC? I think this one's pretty easy, Ryan. What's yours?
I think it's Ohio State.
Agreed. Why?
Yeah. Because it's the Midwest implications. It's that USC has been in playoff games. They've been competitive, trying to win national championships. USC is still rebuilding, right? Like they were coming off a 4-8 season. They obviously had a big turnaround in year one under Lincoln Riley, but they're still building to be in a championship level type of team. Ohio State has been that team in pretty recent years, right? So the Midwest implications, the fact that they've kind of been there obviously a lot more than what USC has been recently. I think that you get a lot more of a momentum boost out of beating Ohio State right now than you beat USC.
Agree. I think it's also a little bit of a mental hurdle that you have against Ohio State right now, where they're a team you haven't beat in decades. I mean, I don't think they haven't beat Ohio State since I've been alive. Now, in fairness, I think they've only played like 4 or 5 times since I've been alive. But I think Notre Dame has only won like 2 games against Ohio State. I think they were in the 20s. I believe they've only played 7 times. Yeah, they're 2-5 against them. They won in the 30s. Sorry, they won in 35 and 36. And then they didn't play again until 95, and 95 and 96 were home and home. Notre Dame lost both of those. Shouldn't have lost one of them. Then they lost in the Fiesta Bowl in 06, lost in the Fiesta Bowl in 2016, and then, of course, lost last year. So, USC, if you lose to them this year, that stinks. That's a bummer. But you can beat USC. You've beaten USC. It's your rivalry game, but Ohio State's the one that I think has the bigger impact on where your program is. I'll say this. I think beating Ohio State increases the odds you beat USC as well. Because I think it's like the Stanford game in 2012, Ryan. I've said this for a long time. If you go back and look at 2012, Notre Dame, beat Navy early and then had to come back and beat Purdue, and he had the ugly win over Michigan. But hey, you got it done. That Stanford game is when Notre Dame became a completely different team, because Stanford was the giant they couldn't slay. They hadn't beaten Stanford since 2008. So the only fifth-year seniors had been on a team that had beaten Stanford. Manti had never beaten Stanford. Like Zach Martin had never beaten Stanford. Like it was all the fifth-year seniors that were part of the 08 class. It's the only ones that had beaten Stanford. Stanford was a big-time top 10, top 5 team under Harbaugh and then David Shaw. Notre Dame had kind of gotten whooped by them they got outplayed the year before at Stanford. They got destroyed by Stanford in 2010. Under Kelly, they had gotten beat convincingly twice by Stanford. You go to 2012, once they beat that was the dragon they had to slay. Once they beat Stanford, there was no stopping that team in the regular season. No stopping. I mean, I wasn't as worried about Oklahoma. They weren't worried about Oklahoma. They weren't worried about Miami. They weren't worried about anybody else the rest of the year. And to me, Ryan, I think it's one of those things where that could be the kind of win that could springboard your season, or the kind of loss that just completely takes away your confidence. And that's why I think the Ohio State game is the most important. And so it's not quite answering the question, but just looking at it differently, that game to me is the one that has to that's the game that maybe springs you forward where you can beat USC and Clemson because of the confidence you gain. And I think Notre Dame is a team that with a growing confidence, but until they win that kind of game, this team's never going to truly believe that they can be that team. And the Stanford game did that for the 2012 team. And Ohio State game could do that for this team. Or it could completely sap their confidence and say, yeah, we're just not that team.
Ohio State fans are also pretty intolerable a lot of the time. So
with the exception of Archer.
Sure.
The exception of Archer. Yeah. But no, you're
I said most of the time. So, you know, there's a little wiggle room there. Yeah. Archer's good peoples.
Yeah.
He's good peoples.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. All right. David Lowe says, good Lord, Malik just said he would take Spencer Rattler and Jaden Daniels over Sam Hartman. This Jaden Daniels one I get from Malik because I think Jaden Daniels is much more like Malik as a player than Sam Hartman is.
Dual threat.
So that one I'm fine with. And there are some offenses that you're going to want Jaden Daniels over Sam Hartman. If you're an offense that really requires a quarterback to be able to run, you're going to want that, for example. If Colin Klein was the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, for example, you may want a Jaden Daniels over Sam Hartman because of the fact he uses the quarterback to run the way he does. In this particular offense, I don't think it's as needed. So I would personally take Sam Hartman over both of them. The Spencer Rattler one, I didn't hear Malik say this. So I'm only commenting on your post, David. I don't get that one at all. I mean, maybe he saw him in Elite 11 where he looked great, but Spencer Rattler is one of the most mentally I'll say this because I don't like the word soft, mentally fragile quarterbacks in the country. How about that?
He could throw a football about as well as anyone, man. But like he just
Ryan, he's a top 5 quarterback nationally in shorts.
Yes,
I mean he can spin it, buddy. Yeah, he can spin it.
Unfortunately, the quarterback position is built off of intangibles, which is things that are kind of built, you know, in your mind, in the day-to-day, like that type of stuff. And in that capacity, Sam Hartman's way higher than what Spencer Rattler is. Like I think I think that the South Carolina game against Notre Dame last year was the perfect representation of Spencer Rattler. Looked really smooth in the first half, man. Made some big plays.
No pass rush. They're winning.
When stuff got more difficult in the second half, I feel like there was a little bit of folding that happened. You know, a little bit of gun shyness, right?
And we see that from him all the time.
Yeah. So if Malik's comments were Spencer Rattler and Jaden Daniels are both more talented than Sam Hartman, sure, man, absolutely. Physically,
right.
Yeah,
right.
But better quarterback. Nah. Sam Hartman's a better quarterback than Spencer. I would entertain the Jaden Daniel one. Like we could have a conversation about that one, but Sam Hartman's a better quarterback than Spencer Rattler.
I mean, Spencer Rattler wasn't even a better quarterback than Tyler Buckner when they played each other. I mean, head to head isn't the end all be all, but you know, like you said, Ryan, when conditions are perfect, Spencer Rattler looks good.
He's about as good as anybody in college football when things are going well. I mean, but
But that's not football. That's not football. You can have a couple game stretch like that, but you're not going to be that way over the course of a season. But you could even see it in his face, Ryan, in the bowl game. The frustration, how he didn't know what to do. He couldn't find answers. He couldn't put the team on his shoulders. Like, you know, when Tyler Buckner throws that pick six, you just saw how he came back just calm. Like, that was a stupid throw by me. That was my bad. And then next drive, he just leads them right down the field. Now they ran it, but he also made some plays, and you go for a touchdown. That's the difference, right? That's the intangible part that you talk about. Is he have better arm talent than Tyler Buckner? Sure.
For sure.
Is he a better quarterback than Tyler Buckner? He wasn't on that day. It's more proven, but he wasn't on that day because Tyler Buckner showed me when stuff hits the fan, he's getting hit in the face, he's making turnovers, he's not going to get rattled. He's going to keep battling, and if you give him the ball at the end of the game, look out. And that's what he did. Whereas Spencer Rattler, his team it folded. And if it wasn't for the pick six late in the game, that's a rout at the end of that game because it would have put them up 45-31. You know South Carolina was about to go 3-and-out on that next series, Ryan. You know they were because they had no momentum. Next, who knows? It could be 52-31 next time that Spencer Rattler gets the football if it's not for that pick six.
Yeah.
But one guy handled that adversity well. His team won. One guy didn't. His team lost. And, Ryan, that's exactly what you said in almost every show we had leading into that game about Spencer Rattler. This kid throws it like $1 million, but if it's a close game or if you're hitting him, he will fold. That's exactly what happened.
He has a very unfortunate name for playing quarterback because there's a lot of rattled jokes that could come off of his name. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Next question is, here's one from David Lowe along that same conversation. He says, Brian, would you rate Sam Hartman? I'll throw this to you as well, Ryan. I'll let you answer it first if you'd like to, if you need to think about it for a second. But Brian, would you rate Sam Hartman preseason top 5 quarterback?
Off the top of my head, he would be somewhere in probably the top 5 to 6 area, somewhere in that ballpark. I mean, I'm trying to think it out loud a little bit. Caleb Williams, Drake May, Michael Penix had a really nice season this past year. I mean, after that, I mean, he's in the conversation for like 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that ballpark. I think we lose sight of the fact that the guy threw 77 touchdowns in the last 2 years. He's thrown 110 touchdowns in his career. Like, he's been a pretty dang productive quarterback, right? So, yeah, I think he's definitely in the top 5 conversation, if not top 6. He's somewhere. He's firmly in the top 10. Like, that's not even a conversation.
Here's the way I look at it, Ryan. You tell me if you here's my top guys that I know for sure, barring good health, are in my top 5 next year. There's 4 of them. Well, there's 3 of them. I'll say this: Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Michael Penix. Those guys 3 for sure are top 5 guys. Then there's, to me, a couple guys that are in that conversation for the next 2. I think Jordan Travis is the more dynamic player, but when you watch those 2 go toe-to-toe last year, Sam Hartman outplayed him. I mean, he just did, and Wake Forest won that football game. So, to me, that Jordan Travis and Sam Hartman are probably the next 2 in line for me in that conversation. But, you have a guy like Bo Nix, whose production was outstanding last year. Bo's only really done it for 1 year for me. I think he jumped up a lot of rankings, but I got to see it for more than a year. And I got to see it in some big games. Bo had some chances to win some games last year. Couldn't get it done. A guy that I really like as a college quarterback, Ryan, that him being banged up a lot last year overshadowed really good play when he was healthy. It's KJ Jefferson.
Yeah.
KJ Jefferson, when he was healthy last year, was a really good football player. And they were a completely different team. I'll tell you this right now. If KJ Jefferson's not hurt, they beat LSU convincingly.
Easily. That Hornsby kid couldn't do anything against them.
Yep. Yep. I mean, you're talking about a kid that completed 68% of his throws, averaged 8.8 yards per attempt, 24 touchdowns, 5 picks, and also rushed for 640 yards and 9 touchdowns. I mean, that's 33 touchdowns and 5 picks, and in the offense where they don't really necessarily ask him to do a ton. I'm curious how he's going to do this year under the new OC. It's going to be a little different deal, but he did some really nice things last year, Ryan. Some really nice things. Is he top 5? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of guys like him, Bo Nix, that are in that conversation. How's Tanner Mordecai going to be this year in a Big Ten school? Is he going to, be better if he's surrounded by better players?
Talia had a good year last year too.
Yeah,
Tagovailoa,
at times. Yeah. I mean, I think the Michigan game still showed me a little bit of his issues where he can make some plays, but then he also is going to make some bad turnovers in some of those big games. Cameron Rising, he's not a guy that I put in that kind of conversation. He's not one of those dudes for me. Spencer Sanders,
just a good college quarterback.
Yeah, Spencer Sanders will probably put up some numbers, but he's not that guy for me. A guy that I'm curious to see if he can bounce back this year with a new OC is Tyler Van Dyke. But then my question there is, they're moving to a bit of an air raid, and I don't know about his skill set fitting that off. I mean, Shannon Dawson's been with Dana Holgerson for a long time. I got to think he's going to keep running the air raid offense. I got to think that.
Think so?
As much as I like,
it's probably a good decision based on that offensive line as well. But
yes,
it's another conversation.
Do you love him as I mean, not to say love him. I know you're not as high on him as I am, but do you see his skill set being an air raid type of skill set? I just don't.
I kind of do. I mean, outside vertical type of air raid, like, yeah, I don't see why
but
not.
That's not really what Houston does, though, is it? I mean, they'll throw some of that, but they've always been kind of a quick game, get guys in space, get the ball out quick, be accurate. I just always visioned Tyler Van Dyke as a big-armed downfield thrower, vertical passing game, that kind of thing. And I don't know if that version of the air raid really fits it overly well. We'll see. I hope it does because I like him as a player.
Yeah.
But, it's going to be – Brennan Armstrong's going to put up really big numbers next year. with Robert and I at NC State. I don't know if
Oh.
he'll put up numbers like he did at Virginia because his pass catchers aren't as good as the group he had at Virginia in 2020, 2021. But I think he'll bounce back to a degree, Ryan. He won't be in my conversation, but there's going to be some guys like that that have
Devin Leary from
years.
Kentucky. See what he looks like. Yeah.
You know, I think he'll. You're going to laugh at this, but I think he's going to throw for. I think his passing numbers are going to be better than anything Will Levis did the last 2 years.
Nah. I wouldn't be shocked by that at all. I wasn't a Will Levis guy. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, if he was at Ohio State or Alabama, though, he'd be the number one overall pick, supposedly, allegedly.
Yeah.
So,
you know who's going to be high on everybody's list that we haven't mentioned is JJ McCarthy is going to be high on a lot of people's lists. I can feel it.
You know
right
what?
now.
He's going to get overhyped because of, they overhyped the Big Ten, but I actually really do like him at Iowa. I do. I think that's going to be. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Cade McNamara.
Yeah.
AJ McCarthy, to me, is going to get a lot of hype. He's got to develop a lot as a passer for me. Because even the big plays he made against Ohio State, he was throwing to wide open dudes off play action.
Yeah.
He's got to show me he can process defenses. Because I think TCU exposed him a little bit. They threw some coverages at him. They dropped some linebackers underneath certain things. Like, I think they confused him a little bit. He still showed his playmaking ability and all that. But they got to turn him loose a little bit this year, Ryan. He's going to get a lot of hype. You are correct on that. I thought for some reason I went right to Cade McNamara. He's the guy that I was referring to. I think he's going to be a great addition for them. And getting Eric All as a tight, but like rock solid for them is and that's all he is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is a massive upgrade over what they had before.
I guarantee Cade McNamara has a low interception total and a decent completion percentage. He just keeps it moving. You know what I mean? Like efficient,
yep.
Which they need in that offense. They do.
Yep. Here's my question for you, Ryan. Genuine question. I'm curious what you feel about that. Which team has the bigger upgrade at quarterback? Not who's better of the two quarterbacks, but who is the bigger upgrade over what they had last year? Cade McNamara over Spencer Petras or Sam Hartman over Drew Pine?
Probably McNamara over Petras, man. Mm-hmm. I mean, Drew Pine still threw like 21 touchdowns or whatever the heck he did last year. Like, he was still fine. Spencer Petras was a dumpster fire, man. Like, he was a bad quarterback, man. He was bad. Like, he was really bad. So I'd probably go McNamara just because Spencer Petras was so bad, man. Like,
the reason I ask is not that I think Petras was better than Drew Pine. He was not. Drew was much better. It's more of how much better is Sam Hartman related to Cade McNamara. I agree with you, however. I think that the gap between, even though I think Sam Hartman is much better than Cade McNamara, the gap between, because like Drew Pine could get you out of a game.
Yeah.
Like, hey, here was Drew Pine's job last year. Don't screw it up. Right? And make a couple plays here and there.
Drew Pine is like Cade McNamara-ish, right? It's like you can do enough to win a football game. It's fine. It's fine.
Not as good as Cade was, but very similar. That's a good point. That's a very good point. Very good point. All right, here's the next one, Ryan, from Archer452. How many combine invites do you think Notre Dame will have in 2024?
Well, I have an article that I'm writing about on this, Archer. I mean, it's very dependent on how many guys declare, because there are some underclassmen I think could make things very interesting in that regard. As of today, I would say Joe Alt is a pretty likely early declaration, right? I mean, he was just an All-American at left tackle. He's going to be a 2.5-year starter, however you want to coin it. He would be one. I think that if Blake Fisher declares for the draft, he will definitely be one. Like, there's no doubt about that. I think Javonte Jean-Baptiste from Ohio State will most likely get a combine invite. I think Riley Mills is another one that most likely gets a combine invite. After that, it's like, does Jordan Botelho start at Viper this year and make the jump to the NFL? Like, I could see that one being one, right? Possibly. Cam Hart's obviously another one that I almost skipped over. He's definitely going to get a combine invite. There's no doubt about that one. I'm up to 5 definites, in my opinion. After that, it becomes, do the running backs declare? Right? Does Audric Estime declare early? Does Logan Diggs declare early? Does Chris Tyree head to the NFL? Those are the question marks right there. And I think if all 3 of them left, I mean, at least 2 out of 3 would definitely get combine invites, if not all 3. So, I mean, I think you're looking at 5, maybe 7, depending on how people declare, come back, all that type of thing. But I think we're looking about 5-ish, give or take 1 or 2.
Yeah, I think that bodes well for Notre Dame in a lot of ways, Ryan, because if you look at it, you said Hartman, you said
I actually didn't say Hartman, so make that
okay.
6.
I
6
just
definites.
assumed.
Yeah.
But you lose Hartman for sure next year.
Yep.
And you lose Caleb Smith, who could potentially be one.
It's possible.
You lose Cam Hart probably, right?
Yeah.
Outside of that, I'm trying to think, Ryan. I don't know that anyone else on Notre Dame's roster is completely out of eligibility next year, of your expected starters.
Javonte Jean-Baptiste, I mentioned. I don't know if you mentioned him.
Is he definitely out of eligibility?
Isn't he a 6th year?
6th year now. Yes,
I think he's 6th year. Yeah.
So, but he's got to win a starting job first.
Sure.
You know what I mean? But so you'd have him, who you only have for a year. But I mean, Howard Cross can come back. All your linebackers could come back. I don't expect DJ Brown to start at safety, so I don't count him. Thomas Harper, if he starts in the nickel, would be one. But Riley Mills can come back the following year. What I'm saying is, there's not a lot of dudes that are just out of eligibility next season. There just aren't many.
Final year guys, yeah.
Right, which makes that number a little bit tricky because it's okay, well, if Xavier Watts has a breakout year or something like that, you could always have a guy like that. Not that I would anticipate him leaving, but that's where the numbers are going to come from. Is it's going to have to come from underclassmen that declare with eligibility remaining. To your point, Joe Alt, Blake Fisher,
the running backs.
It's going to have to come from guys like that, and not guys who are just done. So, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at on that one. So it's going to be interesting to see what those numbers are. I think the more interesting one. Did you mention Chris Tyree?
I did. Yep.
Okay. The more interesting one is going to be the next year, the 2025 combine is going to be really interesting to see if Notre Dame has a lot more guys there. Because that could get. I mean, because you might have Benjamin Morrison coming out. You'll definitely have the safeties coming out then. You'll have definitely whatever offensive lineman doesn't come out. Definitely the running backs will be coming out. Potentially some receivers will be coming out. Potentially Mitchell Evans. Although, I think he's more of a 4 to 5 year guy. Riley Mills, for sure, if he doesn't come out this year, would be coming out that year. It's going to be very interesting to see how that goes.
I will say this, Archer, to your question. I think Notre Dame has more players in the 2024 scouting combine than what they had this year. They had 4 this year. I would say they have at least 5, though. I would say that. That's my take. I don't think it's hot either. It's just a take.
Yeah. And Zeke Correll we don't have on there because we anticipate Zeke Correll probably coming back the following year. And he'd have to – I don't know if he'd be a combine guy for me, even if he does leave after this year.
He'd have to take a nice jump. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Call me Ty with a question. Any chance that Estime or Diggs go pro after this year? Could you see both leaving, which is kind of similar to what you had mentioned with the combine? But thoughts on that specifically, Ryan?
Call me Ty. Every time a running back has a draftable grade and they can leave after 3 years, I say go leave, personally. The shelf life is something that we talk about a ton. Running backs, not a ton of them get to second contracts. So beneficially for the individual player, starting that clock as early as possible is a very good idea. Could one of the running backs go pro after next year? Yes, they definitely could. I mean, Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, whoever decides to make that jump. Could both of them? It's possible. I think that's a pretty rare thing, though. You don't usually see 2 running backs declare early on the same team. That doesn't happen a ton. Usually it's like a guy's a senior or a guy's an underclassman, then they go, right? You don't usually see 2 guys and just declare early like that. That's a pretty rare feat. But I would say it's, you have some chance that it's 1, less of a chance that it's 2, but it's certainly possible. I mean, they're both very good football players who will have NFL futures, in my opinion.
Because if I remember,
the last one I can remember off the top of my head was Darren McFadden and Felix Jones as juniors. That's the last one I can really remember. I'm sure there's somebody more recent.
Trying to think of years where 2 big time backs came out the same year. Georgia had 2 big time backs come out the same year, but they were both seniors. Sonny Michel and Nick Chubb, they were both seniors. And neither of them had redshirted. I mean, so they had no choice.
They were gone.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time you saw 2 guys on the same roster come out early.
Felix Jones, Darren McFadden. That's the last one I can remember. It's the last one.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
They both went in round one. Didn't Felix Jones get picked by the Cowboys in the first round? That was
20 something or something. Yeah.
So dumb. All right, let's go to the next question here from David Lowe. David says, Brian and Ryan, what freshman receiver would you say has the best chance of playing time this year? I think you and I have the same order on this year, Ryan.
Yeah.
You go rank them 1 to 3 of the early enrollees.
Yep. Jaden Greathouse, number 1, because I just think he's the most physically advanced. And I know that from the sounds of it, his injury stuff he's getting back pretty well from all that stuff. So I think he'll be a go for most of spring. Rico Flores would be number 2, just because I think he is also advanced from a route running perspective and the ability to I think he could do a little bit of multiple things for you. And Braylon James has the profile as far as like the speed, the height to play for you pretty early, but he's not as technically advanced as those guys are. So long-term, Braylon James could be a superstar. I just think short-term, guys like Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores just have a little bit higher floor than Braylon.
Yeah. Braylon to me is more, he's more Chase Claypool than he is Michael Floyd. Meaning Chase should have played more as a freshman than he did, but he was super raw, incredibly talented. Michael Floyd was incredibly talented, but he was ready to play the minute he stepped foot on campus in Notre Dame. He just was physically, technically, strength-wise ready to play. Braylon need time. However, Braylon James is not a kid that I am going to say doesn't have a chance, because he's got the one thing, Ryan, that can trump all that other stuff. Speed and explosiveness. I put them together into one thing. You like how I did that? Because I started thinking the one after I said one. But those two things, I guess you could say, can be a trump card for a guy to just say, hey, look, we just need that skill set for 10 snaps a game.
Yeah.
Right. But, whereas the other guys, physically, they're ready to play, but they may be behind other guys that are similar players. Braylon brings something that not a lot of other guys in the roster have. I don't think it'll be enough necessarily this year, but if he can make a big jump technically in the spring and summer, he could surprise us. But right now, of what we know, I agree with your order preference. But and I'm sure you agree with what I'm saying is if Braylon really makes strides this offseason, he immediately jumps at the top of that list as far as the guy that has the best chance of playing, because he brings that one skill set that nobody else has.
Yeah,
and that is just he's a burner for that size.
No doubt about it.
Next question here, Mr. Roberts from Bailey Brad. What freshman breakout would have the biggest impact on the 2023 season? That's a really interesting way of asking that question. Not like as whose emergence could have the biggest impact on this team from the freshman class.
That is very interesting. It's very interesting.
I've got an interesting one. I'm curious to see what you think when I say it. I got one on each side of the ball. Ryan, so.
I think for me defensively, this is probably be a little bit of a wild card one. Devin Houston might be an interesting one. Yeah, I think because he showed up at 6'4", 282 pounds, right? He's listed right now, and you don't have a ton of size on the interior defensively. You need to find some bigger bodies. Devin Houston's a young man that I think could come in and could play, man. Like he's just one of those really sound football players who has length, he has size, and he's a good athlete for the position as well. So when you kind of mold that together, I wouldn't be shocked if he plays. No. Like, I'm not saying like starter day one, but I'm saying like finds a rotational opportunity inside on the defense. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if he does that.
He was mine on defense.
Yeah.
I'd say he's as far as, now look, there's other guys who could play, but like if Christian Gray breaks out, I don't know if he necessarily moves the needle a ton because they're kind of loaded there already.
Right.
He's the one that plays at a position that you say, boy, I don't know if that's necessarily a position where they have anyone like him.
Right.
Like he plays the game a lot like Howard Cross does, in my opinion, but he's 3 inches taller and already 20 pounds heavier. Right. Yeah. Is that a fair positional comp?
Yeah.
Like skill set comp.
Yeah.
He brings a lot to the table. Look, but honestly, you could say any of the 4 defensive linemen. If one of those 4 breaks out, the reason we're going with Devin Houston, I think, Ryan, is because he's the pure inside guy of that group.
Yes.
And that's where the need is greater, in my view. Yep. Offensively, this is a little bit of a tougher one.
I have one, but offensively, it's a little bit off the radar. So, like, I'm thinking if there is a scenario where maybe one of the guards isn't playing really well, and then all of a sudden Charles Jagasaw is there in the summer or kind of early on in the season, and you're like, let's make the switch. And then all of a sudden, you now have 6'6", 330-pound Blake Fisher, 6'8", 320 pounds Joe Alt, and you have another 6'6 plus 325-pound behemoth. That might push you over the fact of like, hey, man, top 5 group, but like maybe that's the best group in all of college football. Like that might be, man.
And don't be shocked that Billy Strouth is 310 plus.
Exactly.
Don't be shocked by that.
Zeke's going to be the small guy at like 305 or 308 or whatever he is. Like, all right.
A little midget over here, and Zeke is only 305. He was my pick too on offense because, again, biggest impact, if Charles Jagasaw forces his way onto the field where he's just too good not to play, man, like you've got a massive physical offensive line. I'm not predicting it. I think he'll need time technically, but man, he's got some tools. I mean, he's my number 1 player in the class, right? He's the only 5-star in the class, so he's got a ton of tools. He'd be my pick there too. Would there be a number 2 for you? My number 2 is a little bit of an outside the box one. I'll say it the way you think about it. How about that?
Sure.
It's Jeremiah Love. Because I feel like if Jeremiah Love forces his way onto the field, what does that say about how good Jeremiah Love is?
That's a good
right?
point. Yeah.
And then he brings such a unique skill set. Like he does a lot of what Chris Tyree does, but he does it in like a 5 inches taller, 5 to 10 pound heavier package, right? And so if for some reason he broke out, you could use him in so many different ways that would add to and complement the guys you already have in the backfield. I think he could have a really big impact. Now, I'm not predicting it because the position is so loaded, but he would be one that would be fascinating if for some reason he was just, oh my gosh, that guy's too good not to play. Like that would be fun to watch.
Yeah, that one's a better pick than mine. I was just thinking about one of the wide receivers, but like I don't think it really moves the needle a ton just because there are other talented players on the roster. It's not like there's one guy coming in that it's just like, you don't have that, right? Like it'd be great if Braylon James broke out, right? But you will have a bunch of outside receivers with length that can win vertically. Like you have some of those guys, right? Like that could change the conversation a little bit. But like for me, that's taking a step up and that's great, but it's not like transforming anything. I think Charles Jagasaw transforms things potentially. Like you could turn a good offensive line into a great one. Like you can really level up with that type of dude. And I also think if it's Charles too, if Charles does make that type of jump early on, then it's like if he is a starting left guard, let's say, right? It's such an easy transition from 2023 to 2024 to say like Joe Alt declared early, Charles, one step out, buddy. That's all you got. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, Jeremiah Love's a good one though, man, because that kid has some special ability.
And that's all I'll say is if Braylon James, let's just say he grew up in a hurry and he was this junior year version this year, I do think he would move the needle just because you're right, Ryan. They have other vertical players, but none of those other guys are vertical players because of their size. He would be a vertical player because of his size, and he's clearly the fastest outside receiver that they have, in my opinion, pure outside receiver. So I would say that would be it. But I just think with Jeremiah, you can just get him the ball so many different ways that's why I would go with him over Braylon.
Is Braylon the fastest receiver on the team in general?
Maybe. It might be Lorenzo. Him or Lorenzo.
Close, right? Yeah. I would love to see them race, man. That would be a good race, I think.
Yeah. Yep. I would. Yeah, that'd be a really good one. John Mayernich asks, will you staffers be taking a morale day and group trip to go see Scream 6? So first of all, that would be hard to do because Sean lives in Chicago. Ryan lives in New Jersey. So we won't be getting together for a movie. And if we did, it wouldn't be for Scream 6 for me. I watched the first Scream and it was all right. And I just never had an interest to see all the others. I didn't realize they had 6 of them. I
was about to say that I had no idea that there were 6 Screams, man. Yeah. That's wild. Yeah. I think I stopped after the second one. I'm just
was never my cup of tea. Yeah. I've seen the second one on, but I've never like sat down and like watched the whole thing through. It was not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
I think probably the next movie I'll go see in about a month from now, the movie Nefarious is releasing, which I'm really looking forward to seeing. Very much looking forward to seeing. My wife really wants to go see, Ryan, you're going to laugh at this. My wife's begging me to take her to see 80 for Brady.
I don't know what that is. What is 80 for Brady?
It's this movie. It's supposedly based on a true story. These 4 old ladies that go on this trip to go see Tom Brady at the Super Bowl.
Oh my God.
And it's like got Sally Field and Jane Fonda and Lily. It looks funny, but I just don't know if I actually want to pay to go see that movie. But you'll have to DVR it. It looks kind of funny. But my wife's begging me to take her to that. But I may go see Jesus Revolution that's still out. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to have time to go see that, but I may go see that one. But yeah, we won't be doing that. It would be fun though. Like if we all were covering a bowl game to go hang out and go to a movie. If there was a good one out,
we should go see 80 for Brady. Apparently,
there you go. My wife or my dad went with me to the Fiesta Bowl. Well, both the last two Fiesta Bowls. I brought my dad down with me, but the first one against Ohio State was when one of the new Star Wars, one of the latest phase of Star. I think it might have been the first one. What 2015 was when the first one came out, right?
Sounds right.
The new phase, I think.
Yeah. So
we went and saw that. That was fun. So we saw that down.
The first one wasn't bad, and then just got very bad.
Lamer and lamer. Yeah, it had so much potential. It really did. I thought the first one had a lot of potential, man. I was like, this is going to totally make up for how bad the last one was. Because like the first three had like one cool character, and they killed him off in the first season. That was Qui-Gon Jinn. Was like the only character I liked. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Ewan McGregor did an okay job as Obi-Wan Kenobi, but that was about it.
He did.
But like, I'm sorry, Natalie Portman's character was nauseating. Hayden Christensen, awful. Jar Jar Binks was terrible. Just the whole like the his boss that goes like what are we doing this for? Like this is the stupidest thing ever. It was so dumb. It was so lame. You totally wasted Samuel L. Jackson's potential as a star. As a Jedi.
I forgot he was in there. Yeah,
it's just lame. The whole first one was just the second grouping was just phase lame. Yeah. Just the whole thing was lame.
Man, this last one, man, it was for like a year. I was like, man, I wonder where they're going to go with Rey's character. It could go so many different ways. Who's her parents? What's her lineage? Where is it coming from? And then it was just like, that's really lame.
I didn't even see the third one. I was so over it after the second one. I was like, whatever, dude.
That was a good decision on your part.
Yeah. I should have stuck with I'm not going to go see Love and Thunder, but
that was bad too. It was bad
because I heard it was terrible, but I was like, whatever.
It was bad.
But I watched it on the plane coming back from the bowl game, and I was like, I really wish I would have made a better choice on this because it was awful.
It was so bad.
That guy needs to never ever make another Marvel movie. He has completely destroyed Thor's character. There's two characters in Marvel just ruined, in my opinion. As good as the franchise was up until recently, like through Endgame, the two characters they just missed so many opportunities with was Hulk and Thor. I missed so much potential with those two characters.
I would throw Scarlet Witch into there too, man. I hate how they did her in the last what's his name? Doctor Strange movie.
I didn't go see it. I didn't.
Yeah, I was like, man, you could have done so much with that character, and you just were like, nah, we're good. Like, all right.
Yeah.
They need to just stop with Marvel for a couple years, man, and start over with some other storyline.
They do a reboot. Yes, seriously. Like the Eternals was kind of lame. I thought bad. Just no character development. It was lame.
And it could have been so cool, but that type of movie, you need to have like multiple movies leading up to that storyline. You know, like there's so many characters. You can't just force all those characters and try to develop those characters in such a short time. Like, no, that's not going to work.
Yes. The phase is a phase 4, right? Is what we're in now. Or is it phase 5? Phase 4, from what I saw so far, has been the only one that I've seen of the new ones that I liked was actually Black Widow. I actually thought that was pretty good. Her sister's character was hilarious. In that. Like she was really good.
Have you seen Shang-Chi?
Yes, that one was good. That was good. Yep, that's one. I forgot about that one. That one was pretty good.
I like that one. That's probably my favorite of the phase so far, actually.
Hawkeye was Loki was like I did not like Loki at all. I watched the first 3 or 4 of the Captain of the Falcon and Winter Soldier. That was lame.
Yeah,
it just. Like how does Winter Soldier go from being what he was, that bad butt kicker he was in there to like what he was in that one? It's just like, with all due respect to Falcon, that guy's not, you know what I mean? Like, come on now.
That was the worst part was that WandaVision, I thought really like it led up to like the Scarlet Witch's character. And I'm just like, wow, I wonder where they're going to go with that with her. Like, that's cool. And then what they did in the Doctor Strange, I was just like, man, that was very disappointing. How did that
Yeah.
ended? All right,
Yeah.
cool.
I had a feeling that was going to suck, Ryan. So I just said, you know what? I'm
Yeah.
not going to ruin it for
Don't
myself.
watch it, man. Don't
I'm
watch
just
it.
not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah.
Not going to do it. All right. That's what makes Lord of the Rings so rare and good is it got better every time.
Yeah.
Like most get worse. Like Matrix got worse and worse and worse every single one. Like I love the original Matrix. The third one was just trash. So yeah, we'll see. Next question here, Ryan, from Johnny S. Does anything about Coach Freeman and the current staff give you the idea that they will fall into the habit of playing the vets over playing the best young guys? For me, Ryan, it's hard to say on the offensive staff because it's none of these guys have been in a position of authority before.
Right.
I thought that Jared Parker did a really good job getting Mitchell Evans and the freshman tight ends ready to play last year, but he had no choice.
Sure.
Right? I mean, he had no option. I thought that Coach Stuckey did a good job with the young receivers and all that, and Coach McCullough got young guys going. But again, he didn't have any choice but to get the young guys going. But I have more evidence on offense, I would argue, that they'll play younger guys over vets than we do on defense outside of Mike Mickens. I mean, because look, they had sophomores pass up a veteran Chris Tyree. I mean, like they did. I mean, you saw the freshmen were kind of being groomed. They were eventually going to replace Kevin Bauman if he didn't get hurt. I mean, that just was going to happen. So I would say we have more evidence there than we do there. I don't know enough about Joe Rudolph's background at Wisconsin to say he's going to play young guys if they're ready. And to be honest with you, he wasn't ever really bringing in, with all due respect to Nolan Rucci and Logan Brown, he was never bringing in freshmen as good as Charles Jagasaw. I don't care what their ranking was.
Sure.
Because he's so physically ready to play. Now, will he be technically? I don't know. But I would say there's more evidence from the offensive coaches that they can get young guys ready to play. Yeah. And we'll play them over veteran guys, but it's very limited experience and very limited in that. Defensively, I have major concerns about their ability and willingness to play young guys in the front seven. Very concerned.
Yeah, I was about to say on the first two levels, right? Like, yeah. One guy, Brian, that I was excited about going into last season that you never saw was like Alexander Ahrensberger. I'm like, where did that guy go, man? Did he like disappear? I don't understand. I mean,
he was solid in 2021, I thought.
I thought so too. Yeah. I was like, another year of maturation, getting more good weight on. Like, yeah, exactly.
He wasn't hurt.
You didn't see a bunch of young guys on the defensive line. You didn't see any of the young guys pretty much on linebacker until later in the season when they kind of had to a little bit and they kind of got forced. Like, yeah, you just didn't see it, man. Just didn't see it.
Much more concerned about that side of the ball. No doubt about it. Scott Yerbick with a question. He says, what makes a lineman a good center? When we recruit a lineman, is there a plan to have that recruit be a center, or is it something that needs to be taught? I'll let you take a shot at that, right?
Yeah. I mean, so I think that this trickles down from the NFL draft side of things to like how you're basing this on recruiting. But when I see a center, one is like the intelligence side of thing, right? Like there has to be a mental capacity to kind of help, set protections, do all that type of stuff. But that's something a little further down the line, like from a long-term perspective. I look for quick burst athleticism off the line of scrimmage, the ability to transition up to the second level, smoothness and understanding of angles. Those are things that I always look for in a center because there's going to be a lot of times that a center is uncovered. And when they're uncovered, even if they're comboing, that means that he's going to be kind of most likely the guy that works up to the second level. So you need guys that have kind of that quick twitch explosiveness off the snap. You need guys that also have an understanding of like, hey, man, I'm snapping, so I have to get one hand on a guy, but also maintain balance to get that second hand on throughout the entirety of the block. But I think the main thing for me is that like body types can differ so much, like you'll see a guy like Zeke Correll who's around like 6'3", a little bit stumpier. Then you'll see a guy like a Joshua Myers that played at Ohio State that's like a 6'5" kid playing center. But I think all those guys, what they have in common is that there's got to be like a smoothness to you as an athlete. You got to be able to get up to the second level. You got to be able to play once. You have to kind of be controlled with one part of your body comparative to both sides fully, as far as like gaining extension with one arm versus two arms. So that's kind of the main things for me, Brian, is that like mostly it's that getting up to the second level, having some movement skills, quick burst off the line. Like those are some main things that I look for at center.
I think it all works. I think the part about being able to snap, step, and punch with your opposite, like to do two things at once, and step is a skill that not everyone can do. But when you're recruiting it, you look for guys that have fast hands and are very coordinated. That's why I like the idea of like Ashton Craig and Joe Otting because they're very athletic. I love the notion of, I know it used to be where centers were kind of like physical mauler types, but I personally, in today's era, you got to be physical at center, but I want a guy that can move.
Yes.
I really do. Now you can't be a mover that can't can't move people, right? Like you've got to have some physicality, but man, I'll tell you what, I really like a center that can move and get to the next level and even pull if you need to.
Yep.
I think that adds so much to an offense when you have a center that's a really effective getting to the second level guy, quick, winning with angles and leverage and all that. I love that kind of, and that's probably my bias because as a Broncos fan, I always felt like Tom Nalen was such an underrated center because he wasn't a butt kicker, but he was athletic. He could move. He played with great angles. To me, he was one of the best centers in the league. He just never got the credit for being it. And, and it's been a position that's been a bit of an issue for a long time since he left.
Tom Nalen, former Hawaii Rainbow Warrior back in the day. So, I mean, but that is where the archetype's going, though. I mean, if we're looking at it, right? Like, who are the centers that people value coming out of the draft now? They don't value why Creed Humphrey fell to the late second round because he's not what teams are looking for. And that's a fault, right? Because Creed's ended up being a very good center in the NFL, but they're looking for Tyler Linderbaum. Like that's the new version of the center, right? Guys that are super athletic, that can pull, that can work out in space, that can get up to the second level. Like that's what centers are kind of turning into now. Like you still want the big dudes at guard because they got to play in tighter spaces, but you want length outside and foot quickness. You want more physicality in at guard, and then you want the speed at center. Like that's kind of what people are kind of looking for now. So the archetype is kind of changing a little bit at the center position.
Yep. All right, let's get to the next one. We got one from Michael Johnson. Would you rather have a Heisman winner or 1,000-yard receiver? That's an easy one for me.
Heisman winner. Yeah. If you have a Heisman winner, usually it's a quarterback. And if you have a quarterback that's winning a Heisman, that's usually on a really good football team, right? So, yeah.
I would say my answer is easy if we're talking about looking at guys, Ryan, that are, if we're talking about a quarterback, I would say easy. If we're talking about a running back, because if a running back has a great year, you can still win the Heisman if you're a top 10-ish team, if you have monster numbers. But I think the way the Notre Dame's roster is built, I think we're probably talking about a quarterback there. And I would go there. Because again, if he's a Heisman Trophy winner, you don't need a 1,000-yard receiver. It means you're spreading the ball around like crazy and you're winning a ton of games because quarterbacks win Heisman's by either putting up stupid numbers or by being on a playoff team. Basically, that's really what it boils down to. And or a team that's a playoff team until the very end. I mean, if USC beats Utah and most of the Heisman votes were already in by then, I mean, none of the deadline wasn't until like after the championship games, right? But most people have their votes in. You can send your votes in early. Most people have their votes in by then. But he was going into championship weekend, Caleb Williams, with a chance for his team to be a playoff team.
Yes.
Right? Well, if he was at Notre Dame, they're a playoff team because they don't have that conference championship game to knock them out. They would have probably jumped in at that point in time, I would think. So, that's kind of how I feel about it.
And if a guy is putting up crazy numbers at quarterback, to your point, like at Notre Dame, if they're doing that means you're probably winning a lot of football games, right? So like those are kind of synonymous together.
Exactly. Next question from Archer452. How would you guys rank the rosters of Notre Dame and their three biggest opponents? So now I assume he's talking about for this season, so not rivalry. So we're going to go Ohio State, Clemson, and USC. So rate the rosters top to bottom. You have to have depth and you have to have star power. And I think that's the combination. For me, Ryan, I'll let your head churn a little bit. It's Ohio State 1, Notre Dame 2, USC 3, and Clemson 4. Clemson lost a lot of talent off their team last year, and I don't know if they necessarily have guys ready to step in and replace them.
Yeah,
whereas like Notre Dame, I feel like with Jordan Patelho and Josh Burnham, they're going to be okay at Viper. I don't know that Clemson has anyone ready to step in and be anything like what Brian Bursey was or what Miles Murphy was. Maybe Miles Murphy, maybe. But like Trenton Simpson, I don't like Clemson's young talent at linebacker coming up. I don't think the linebackers have been coached well. I think Trenton Simpson did not make the jump with Venables gone. I don't like their secondary talent, although their freshman class last year was pretty talented. Their receiver talent is not what it used to be. They have one good running back. Notre Dame has 5. And I love Cade Klubnik, but in 2023, I'm not taking him over Sam Hartman. Offensive line-wise, Notre Dame has better talent there. I think Clemson has a better defensive line talent. And I'd still give him the edge at linebacker for what we know right now. But if you're going to bring in, what we know that's going to play this year, but I don't know if there's another position I'm giving Clemson the advantage over Notre Dame.
Yeah. We would have the same top 2, Ohio State, Notre Dame. I think I might flip Clemson to 3 over USC just because I think Caleb Williams masks a little bit of the talents there. I mean, the offensive line, I think the offensive line's not great. I think it's okay. Defensively, I don't think it's great. I still think Clemson has a lot of talent. I just question, obviously the coordinator spots for that team, especially this past year. I mean, I hope that they kind of take a step forward because I know obviously there was a change on the offensive side of the football. So hopefully it takes a nice step. But I mean, you still have guys, right? Like you have the Williams kid at wide receiver who's a good player. Shipley. I know the right tackle that they had, what was his name? Barrett Miller was the right tackle for Clemson. Freshman. Yeah, he was talented. Kid. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talent there. I think that top to bottom, there's more depth on Clemson's roster. It's just that the separator is that Caleb Williams is a quarterback for one team. So I'd probably go Clemson then USC.
I'd give USC the advantage at quarterback because I'm gonna talk this through. Because I don't offhand, oh gosh, Ryan, you're wrong. I gave you my gut, you gave me your gut. So let's talk it through, right?
Sure.
I give Clemson the edge, I give USC the edge at quarterback, starter and depth. I give USC the edge at running back with an asterisk of Marshawn Lloyd's got to be healthy. But I believe Austin Jones is returning to that group too, and he was pretty good last year.
He is.
I don't like the depth. Phil Moffa's just kind of a depth guy for me. He's just okay.
They got Kobe Pace coming back from injury though. I think.
He's good, but I think USC's guys are, to me, every bit as more proven than the Clemson guys. Is better. It's not a huge difference, but I've always thought Austin Jones had talent. He just played behind a bad offensive line, and when he finally got a shot last year at USC, I thought he did pretty well. I think that Will Shipley's better than him,
right?
But I think the depth there with Marshawn Lloyd coming in is better at USC. Receiver wise, I give USC the advantage there as well. I know that I like Williams. I mean, Bo Collins has got some ability. They got to me, it depends on how big of a jump their freshman class makes now in year 2. If Adam Randall can really have a jump this year, then I think that's where Clemson could maybe get in the conversation of being better than USC. I don't think USC's receiving corps is going to be as good as it was last year. With all due respect to the kid they got from Arizona, he's not as good as Jordan Addison.
Dorian Stinger?
Yeah, he's just not. He's just not. And Mario Williams is a great athlete, but he's never proven to be a great wide receiver yet. And so, but I'd still give them the edge there. Tight end, I'd give the edge to Clemson. Offensive line, I'd give the edge to Clemson. And I would argue that the Clemson edge on offensive line is bigger than any gap that USC has anywhere else at the skill positions over Clemson. Defensively, that's where it gets interesting. D-line, Clemson for sure, even with all the guys they've lost. Linebacker, it's close, actually. I would lean towards – who does USC have? Who does Clemson have coming back?
They have Jeremiah Trotter Jr. and Barrett Carter both coming back.
Okay. All right.
I think they got the McGuire kid who's probably going to step into the other spot.
Possibly, yeah. He'll be a battle, but he's got a shot to do it. When I look at USC, Ryan, actually, I know that Eric Gentry comes back.
Is Shane Lee back? I don't know.
Shane Lee's back. Yep, Shane Lee's back, and so he's a solid football player. I'm not a big Trotter fan, to be completely honest with you. I mean, I think you and I have talked about that before. I like Barrett Carter a lot.
Yeah,
but I mean, he's good, but I think he's a tad overrated. But
I'm not much of a fan of Gentry. I don't really think he's very.
He's okay. They use, what I like about Gentry, Ryan? They use him well, in my opinion. Like, they don't ask him to be a traditional linebacker. They let him kind of run around. I think Mason Cobb was a solid pickup from Oklahoma State as far as depth at linebacker. Shane Lee's a solid player. I think USC's got some guys there. Neither of them are going to be great at linebacker this year. Clemson, to me, I would say has the best linebacker of all of them in Barrett Carter. but I think USC has better size and better depth. In secondary, they both suck. I mean, neither of them are good in the secondary, in my opinion. I'd probably give the edge to Clemson there.
Clemson definitely has more talent.
Yeah,
But
their
yeah, to
freshman,
your point,
their
they're
rising
not,
sophomore class in the secondary, Ryan, has a chance to be pretty good down
Yeah.
the road. USC's secondary. So I mean, so again, I give more advantages to USC than Clemson for me, but I think that Clemson has the advantage in two really important areas. There's three really important areas where you talk about advantages: quarterback and then the lines, and Clemson has an advantage in two of those three. So I think that could maybe trump the number of positions where you give USC, which is like by one, right? Running back, receiver, tight end, linebacker, or quarterback, and then Clemson O-line, D-line, secondary, and then let's call linebacker a wash. How about that? Is that fair compromise? I think
I would still take
Clemson. It's a compromise. I'm trying to compromise with you. Okay. I think it's better. You think it's better. It's not a big difference in my opinion either way. So I'm trying to, you able to compromise with that one? Say we can call it a wash. So so Clemson has the advantage, and USC has the advantage in one more position than Clemson does. But here's the trump card to me, where I think you can make a case for Clemson, is they have the advantage in both lines, and I don't think it's close, in my opinion. Now, USC's line last year could be in that competition, but they lost Nealon, they lost Voorhees. The guys they got coming in are okay. I do like that guard from Florida. He's okay. But again, O-line's not a position I want to throw a bunch of new guys in. Like last year, you had one transfer, but everybody else was guys that had played. Monheim had played the year before. Nealon was a 6-year guy. Voorhees was a 6-year guy. You had a lot of continuity. Their line's going to look a lot different this year. And it was good last year, but it wasn't great last year. It was a little overhyped.
Yeah.
I think it's going to – and I think Clemson's is ascending. You had Barrett Miller's, I believe, a true freshman last year, correct?
I believe so.
Tristan Lee is a talented player. Walker Parks is a talented player. So it's got a chance. Will Putnam's solid. He's a solid player too. So I don't think it's really close on the lines, Ryan, for me. Yeah. And I don't think the kid they got from, was it Purdue or Wake Forest, or which one did USC get? They get the Purdue kid or the Wake Forest kid? They got the Purdue kid.
The defensive ends? Defensive ends, you mean?
Yeah.
I think so.
Jack Sullivan, right? Then they get Jack Sullivan.
Yeah.
And they got Anthony Lucas. But Lucas is okay. I mean, excuse me, Sullivan's okay. Lucas has tons of talent, but he didn't do anything for Texas A&M last year. He's got to prove himself. Clemson to me still has the advantage, but I don't think it's as big as the offensive line advantage, as in my opinion.
It was big for Clemson to get back the Rook, or whatever his name is, the defensive tackle, and Tyler Davis came back. That was good for them. Yeah.
The thing for me is what allow Clemson for me to buy into the argument is I need to see how much jump and how much growth Cade Klubnik makes this year, because right now the quarterback gap is wide.
Sure,
Cade could be good, but you're talking about USC's got the Heisman winner.
Yep.
And I think that's where I would have to give him the edge there. But I think it's debatable. That's the thing, I think, Ryan. But neither of them to me have Notre Dame's.
No, I think Notre Dame's more talented across the board. Yeah.
Well, USC, Notre Dame, quarterback, it's USC, but it's a much narrower gap this year than it was last year.
Sure.
Running back, I give the edge to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Wide receiver, I'd give the edge to USC right now from a proven talent standpoint, but I don't know if it will be that way by the time these two teams play. Is that fair?
Sure. Yes.
Tight end, I would give the edge to Notre Dame. Would you go there?
I don't even know who the tight end is for USC. So
they don't really use them. Yeah. Offensive line, big advantage for Notre Dame.
Yes.
Linebacker, surprisingly, I think I'd probably say it's a wash right now. I think probably give USC the slight edge just from a production standpoint.
Yep.
But I think Notre Dame could overcome that. Secondary, it's not close. It's definitely Notre Dame by a mile. D-line's the interesting one, Ryan, because I'd probably give the edge to Notre Dame right now because USC, to me, has some guys that need to prove themselves. USC lost – the guy they lost is going to be more impactful of a loss than what Notre Dame lost.
Tooley.
And this doesn't mean that Isaiah Foskey's not a really good player. He is. He's a better player than Tooley, in my opinion. But Tooley meant a lot more to that defensive line than what Foskey, even more than what Foskey meant to Notre Dame's. And I'm a lot more confident in what they have to replace Isaiah Foskey than what they're going to be replacing him with, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah.
And overall, other than that, I think the Notre Dame defensive line is better, in my view. So I would certainly feel good about saying Notre Dame is number 2. The difference between Notre Dame and USC last year was coaching and quarterback. That's it. And I thought Notre Dame didn't play well. I thought they played kind of bad. Didn't have Cam Hart. Didn't have Tariq Bracy. and you still went out there, and if Drew Pine doesn't just have 2 terrible turnovers, you got a shot to go out and win that game, as you pointed out, and didn't even play well.
Yep.
So that's where I would be with that one. It's good questions there. That was a very interesting discussion, Ryan. Very interesting discussion. I thought it was anyway. You don't look overly entertained, but I thought it was. John Mayernich, question of the century. What Oilers Titans running back do you take to build your franchise around? Earl Campbell, Eddie George, Derrick Henry, and Chris Johnson. One of those guys to me does not belong in this conversation, and that is Chris Johnson.
I love CJ2K, man. Yeah. He was a good player. It's Earl Campbell, though. I mean, one of my oldest memories, obviously I wasn't alive, but I remember watching a YouTube video where he jumped over the line, got his jersey ripped, and then he put his helmet right in the middle of a LA Rams linebacker's chest. I think it was Isaiah Robertson, who made a Pro Bowl, by the way. Like, Isaiah Robertson was a pretty good football player. Earl Campbell was just a monster, man. Like, he was just insane. He was such a monster that his NFL career did not last that long because he just he seeked contact, man. But he was an animal, absolute animal. A. George was a really good football player, but he was much more college greats than NFL great. Like, he was a good NFL player. I wouldn't say he was a great NFL player.
About 1,000 yards more for his career than Earl Campbell did. And he has more 1,000-yard seasons.
Yeah, but he averaged like 3 yards a carry during his career or something. It was like 3 point something.
That's true. 3.6. Yeah. 3.6. Earl was at 4.3.
If I had to rank that, I'd probably go Earl Campbell, Derrick Henry, Eddie George, Chris Johnson, I guess. Actually, Chris Johnson might be third. I don't know.
To me, the thing about Derrick Henry is he's still incomplete, right? It's kind of unfair to compare him to guys who played their entire careers. But I'll be honest, his three. If he didn't get hurt, I'll say this: if he didn't get hurt last year in 2021 and would have played that whole season. I mean, he had 937 yards and 10 touchdowns, Ryan, in 8 games.
Yep.
He was on pace for another monster season. If he doesn't get hurt, he's my number 2. I'm going to be honest with you, because that 4-year stretch that 5-year stretch that he's on right now, in his last year, he had a down year last year, Ryan, from what everybody tells me. Dude had 1,538 yards and 13 touchdowns, and also had 398 yards receiving, had a career high in receiving yards by almost 200 yards. Right? Like, I'd love to have a running back for the Broncos that has a down year with 1,700 yards of total offense and scores, what is it? 13 touchdowns. Give me that problem for the Broncos, please. You know what I mean? He's on a heck of a run right now. So I think if he wouldn't have got hurt last year, I would argue that I would say, hey, I might have to argue for him being there. And I think you could still even make a case, but it would be no brainer. Is what I'm trying to say, if he didn't get hurt last year. Because that 5-year stretch of, let's just say he slows down a little bit the second half of the year and only finishes with 1,600 yards, which is over 200 yards, well over 200 yards below what the average would be by just doubling it, and say he only played 16 games on 17. Guy was on pace for over almost 2,000 yards again, Ryan.
Yeah.
Like, that's nuts. And had 10 touchdowns in 8 games. So he's had 12, 16, 17, 10, and 13 touchdowns the last 5 years. Like, that's really impressive. Eddie George, as much as I like him, had 2 years where he had 10-plus rushing touchdowns. Now, part of that, too, Ryan, if we're going to be fair, was the fact that he also had a quarterback that was a much better runner than – I say better runner because Ryan Tannehill is really athletic, but a more productive runner, I should say, than what Ryan Tannehill is in the current game. I mean, Steve McNair had over 3,500 career rushing yards. In some of those years that those two guys played together, I mean, Steve McNair has taken some of those touchdowns away from Eddie George. That's got to be part of the conversation, too, when you're just looking at touchdowns. But the 3.6 yards per carry is the one that gets me, is the thing that always has gotten me about it.
Low.
Archer 4-5.
He played on some good teams too. It wasn't he played on a bunch of trash teams either. Yeah,
he did. Well, it was the style of how they ran them. Archer 4-5-2. Which position group most consistently has lower rated guys coming out of high school outperform their rankings, or otherwise stated, which position is the most difficult to rank in high school? I don't know if I would. So my answer is offensive line, but I don't think it's necessarily the difficulty in ranking them. It's twofold for me, Ryan. You tell me if you disagree. Number one is I think a lot of evaluators at what we don't know how to rank offensive linemen. They see a 315-pound guy that just destroys people, and they really good, 5-star. Where people that know how to do this can look at a guy and say, hey, that guy kills people, but he's got slow feet and he can't bend. So in college, like the kid that went to LSU a couple years ago, there's a 5-star player, and I'm like, God, this guy's not it. It was a Turner. I'm trying to remember what his name was, but
Charles Turner.
No, first name started with a K. I'm gonna have to try somebody that's a recruit. Nick, please help me out with this one.
Oh, Cardell Thomas? Are you talking about Cardell Thomas?
That might have been it.
He was the big boy, right? Like big boy.
yeah. And he was a 5-star, and I just didn't see it. I just was like, yeah, I don't see it, y'all. I don't see what you see. But he was just big and just would destroy people in high school. There was another guy. His first name was Julian. I forget what his last name was, but he went to Washington, I believe. And a lot of he's really good players, top 100 guy. And I was like, I told somebody one time, I said, do me a favor. When you're watching him play, watch only his hips and feet. Don't watch the upper body. Don't watch any of that. Just watch his hips and feet. I was like, yeah, I see what you're saying now. Like, he can't move his hips and feet. But he was 6'7", 310 pounds. He just destroyed people at the high school level. The other part of this too, Ryan, is a lot of these guys that become really good NFL players, 0 stars, 2 stars, they weren't anything but that in high school coming out. I mean, they were 3-star guys coming out because they were 250. They needed time to develop. They were awkward. They hadn't grown into their body yet. Things like that, where Joe Alt shouldn't have been ranked as a 5-star coming out of high school because he was 250, 216-pound tight end. He needed that time to grow. You could see the upside, but he shouldn't have been ranked higher coming out of high school because he wasn't there yet. Now, I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade, and that appears that I undersold that. I should have given him a 5-star upside grade of what we've seen, but you saw the upside, but you shouldn't get put a guy in the top 100 just because of upside.
Sure.
And so I think there's a lot of that too. A lot of these guys that just when I was at Duquesne, they had a kid that was coming out. He's an offensive lineman. Probably don't remember him, but he got some NFL looks. It's like 6'5", 310 pounds. And I was like, how did this guy who's getting NFL looks end up at a 1AA school? And they said, because he was 220 pounds coming out of high school. He just blew up in college. I mean,
the answer, man.
Nobody missed on him. He just wasn't that guy coming out of high school. So offensive line to me has the biggest body changes, growth spurts, those type of things that happen to guys where you just don't see that at receiver and quarterback and running back and other positions. So I think that's what makes offensive line the biggest difference. And then the final piece, Ryan, is a lot of offensive linemen just don't know how to play the game yet. They got some guy who's the local accountant teaching them how to play offensive line. And he does his best, but kid's not being coached. So I think that's been a part of it as well. And they don't have the offensive line camps like they have 7-on-7s and things like that year round. They have some, but it's not to the degree that these things are. So those are my reasons why I think offensive line is that answer.
Well, I mean, I think that you see that pathway for a lot of offensive linemen on the NFL level and then into the college level is that like a lot of offensive tackles, especially on the NFL level, were former high school tight ends. Like they were, guys that had developed. You just mentioned Joe Alt. I remember Spencer Brown that came out of Northern Iowa a couple years ago. He showed up at campus at 6'8", 220 pounds to Northern Iowa as a high school tight end. He leaves as a 6'8", 320-pound offensive tackle, right? Where it's like that kid literally had 0 stars coming out of high school, but that's the trend that you see with a lot of these guys, man, because I think what people undersell about especially NFL offensive linemen is that like they're really good athletes, man. Like you have the Lane Johnsons of the world running 4.7. You have the Teron Armsteads of the world running the 4.7s. You just had a kid out of BYU, Blake Freelands, who Blake Freelands, who's a high school tight end quarterback, is now a 300-pounder that had a 37-inch vertical, man. Like those aren't normal dudes. Like, you know why they're not normal? Because they weren't 300 pounds in high school. Like, you're not supposed to be 300 pounds in high school. That's why it's like a weird thing,
right.
Like the development side of things. So I think you nailed it, man. I think it's offensive line. I do. Because it's just people fall too much in love with the highlight tape on offensive linemen, right? Like, I think that's why people miss out on, like, there was one kid that is going to Utah. Well, actually, there's 2 kids that are going to Utah this year in the 2023 class, Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu. They are both going to be very good players, in my opinion. I think they were slightly overlooked a little bit throughout most of the process because they were 6'5", 6'6", 265, 270 pounds instead of your 300-pounders, right? So Utah got a couple studs. I mean, Caleb Lomu went up to the San Antonio, the All-Star game, the All-American Bowl, and he was one of the best offensive linemen there. And then I saw after the event, he's ranked as a top 100 player now, right. Like that stuff happens all
but
the time.
But you had always thought that, Ryan. You'd come to me like,
good,
hey,
man.
I think Notre Dame needs to recruit this guy.
Yeah, Spencer Fano's a good player, man. He's a good player.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. Here, a couple comments here. John Manners, the Earl Campbell-Jack Tatum collision might be the best of all time. And then he says that collision in the Nigerian Nightmare and Steve Atwater was good as well.
Yeah.
Those were two.
Atwater pretty much ended Christian Okoye's career on that play. So
yes, he did. And the best part about it, he was mic'd up. That was the best part about it. You know what I mean? He was mic'd up for that game. So that made it added to it.
I love when they showed Okoye's a workout that he did before the combine. He was like 6'3", 260, ran like 4.6 flats. Like, what, dude? All right.
He made Barry Word the small back on that team. That was the crazy part. Like that, they actually had two good people. Forget this. Like, unless you played Tecmo Bowl. If you played Tecmo Bowl, you remember that. But remember, Barry Word was like 6'2", 240 as the small back on that group. They were monsters on Tecmo Bowl, man. You could not stop that combo.
You couldn't tackle Christian Okoye in that game.
No, you could not. It was crazy. It was crazy. Here's an interesting one from John Mayernich, Ryan. I think this is an easy one, actually. I think it is. I'm curious if you agree. Who do you take? Marshall Faulk, Roger Craig, or Christian McCaffrey?
Am I supposed to order these, or who would I take? Because
who would you take? Yeah, I think it's easy.
Marshall Faulk.
Yeah, I think so too.
Marshall Faulk. Yeah.
How about I draft him first. You got to pick second of the next two. Who do you take?
If health isn't a concern, it's Christian McCaffrey for me personally. Yeah, I mean that kid's special.
Tell me why. Did you just Roger Craig a little before your time, or?
I remember Roger Craig. Man, Roger Craig was like 6'2", 210, 215 for San Francisco. Really good all-purpose back. He was the first thousand, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
McCaffrey, I just think that there was a little bit more of that kind of twitch. Like Craig was a really nice one-cut, smooth dude, but McCaffrey, I think, is just a little more all-around, in my opinion. So that's kind of why I picked him.
The reason I would go with Craig is because of what you said. Injuries are a factor, and McCaffrey hasn't been able to stay healthy, and Craig, for the most part, did. But if you take injuries out, then I do agree. I think Christian McCaffrey is more of a natural running back.
Yeah,
in my opinion, a little bit more than Roger Craig was. But it's picking between two really good football players. Last couple here, Ryan, from Shamrocks and Shenanigans. What's the probability the staff takes a transfer guard a la Michigan in 2021? Olawatimi was the missing piece for Michigan. That would actually be in 2022 is when they took him.
Yeah.
But Sean and I addressed this the other day, Ryan. I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
I mean, if there's somebody out there that's good enough to compete, I'm fine with it, man. I'm fine with it. As long as there's a clear understanding of you have to come in, you have to compete for a starting job. Because there's going to be guys that are coming open, and especially after spring practice, where there's going to be opportunities to maybe take another look at the transfer portal. We know that, right? But for me, I'm very content with what the talent is in the room, though. So if Notre Dame doesn't get a grad transfer guard, I could care less. I really could, because I think that they have enough dudes. But if there's somebody that comes open, man, where you're like, that guy's
someone who is as good as Olawatimi was, who was without question Virginia's best offensive lineman and in a position of need for Michigan. That was a really good signing for them.
Yep.
But I don't know who that guy is right now.
Yeah,
I'm not. I mean, here's the thing for me. I need to see how spring goes first. Right now, you and I are on the same page. But if we come out of the spring, and you're like, yeah, that was not what I hoped it would be. Then yeah, you look into the portal. But for now, I'm good with where they are. Yeah. If the spring doesn't go well, or there's a major injury, and maybe the guards aren't really giving you what you want to see, then maybe you look at the portal. But right now, I'm comfortable with where they are.
Because it's no slander, but when that whole thing about them looking at Mason Lunsford and stuff, right?
Right.
I watched this film a little bit. I'm just like, that wouldn't be a guy that I would target.
Right.
I don't think that's a guy that you need to sacrifice cohesion for letting the young guys play.
Body type is very similar to Josh Luggs, Ryan, and I didn't see a whole lot of difference in the ability.
Yeah,
I didn't.
Little lumbering, not a great athlete. Yeah.
I didn't quite understand that one, to be completely honest with you. So, yeah. We'll see. So I think that is the last question that we had, Ryan, here we go. What is your favorite combo sport to go with football? Does it change with positions? So I think he's looking at what combo position you like for recruits. And the answer is, first of all, yes, it does change with position. Now, with that being said, Ryan, go ahead and give it a shot as far as answering that question.
I like offensive lineman, defensive lineman, always with wrestling. That always works. Offensive tackles, I actually do like. I mean, I'd be honestly okay with basketball or track and field if they were a thrower in the discus specifically. Like that really gives a lot of balance and foot quickness. But I think wrestling is the most translatable to both offensive and defensive line. Quarterback, baseball, as long as they're not a pitcher. I think pitcher mechanics kind of mess it up a little bit, but if they're like a middle infielder, like
shortstop.
Awesome. Yeah.
Give me a guy that's a shortstop or a center fielder.
Like Russell Wilson, for instance. Yeah. Like that's the type of guy.
Kyler Murray is an outfielder too, right? I believe.
Yeah. Yep. Wide receivers, track or basketball or both. Running backs, track or basketball or both. Defensive backs, track or basketball or both. Linebackers, wrestling.
You know what my new one is for linebackers? Lacrosse.
It's a good one.
Lacrosse or basketball, because as I've watched more lacrosse, when you see more guys playing it, the agility and conditioning you need to be good at lacrosse is really something I like, and I think good for those type of guys. It also is a physical contact sport, and I always want them in that mindset of being physical. The ones you said are fine. Yes. Just for me, that's a sport that I've become more and more a fan of watching of those kids doing it. I actually think lacrosse could be a decent sport for receivers as well, because you have to have such good hand-eye coordination I've tried catching a lacrosse ball. It's not as easy as I thought it would be. Would be one, but I think linebacker is really the only one that I would say for sure. Linebacker and running back, I think I'd be okay with a kid playing lacrosse, to be honest with you, if he didn't want to run track. Soccer is another one too. Soccer for me is a sport where I think for young kids is a sport I would have almost every kid play as a youngster, like middle school, elementary school, because I think it's good. It's, it works on hand-eye coordination, conditioning, getting used to running. I don't think it brings as much value once you get older for cross-trained sports, but I think it's great for just development of young athletes at a really young age. And so I think soccer would be that. But once you get into middle school and high school, it doesn't bring as much value to me as others. So that's my take on that one, Ryan. And basketball is a sport I think is good for any kid, to be honest with you, because the conditioning and footwork needed. I mean, we're seeing more and more offensive linemen that are basketball players, and you get to see the footwork and how they move and all that I learned a lot about Joe Otting watching him play basketball, and it was like, oh, this kid's got really good feet, which you don't always necessarily see in the football because of how they use them. Sure. You don't see the change of direction and all that. So I think that's another one as well. So I think that was an interesting one. So yeah, very much so. Well, Ryan, that's going to do it for today's show. Let me hold on a second. We got one here from Archer 452. He says, Bama is taking heat for lying on their players' measurables, having many players listed taller than what the combine had them at. Is that dirty, common practice, or both?
Mostly common practice.
Yes.
Mostly.
And if you're an NFL team and you're caught off guard by a guy's actual height and weight at the combine, you aren't doing your job. Ryan, you're always telling me what the measurements are for players, because there's services that go out and take those measurements and send them to the NFL teams. So the only people getting upset about that are reporters and fans.
Yeah, just
NFL teams are not getting shocked by this. And honestly, it's not Alabama's job to make the media happy. Like, I don't care. Do I think it's dumb to inflate weights and sure, but it's like, but what's the point? But at the end of the day, I don't care. And I don't think it's dirty. I don't think it's something they should, I don't think it's lying. I mean, technically it's lying, I guess, but it's just like, who cares?
Yeah.
There's so much going on in our country right now. The stuff that some people choose to get pissed off about these days, Ryan, really makes me laugh.
It doesn't give you an advantage to be listed bigger or smaller on a roster. Like, at the end of the day, when you're between the lines, you are what you are. You know what I mean? Like, that just is what it is. So,
and if a kid is intimidated by someone's listed height and weight, then he's not that good anyway, and you're not going to win anyway.
Yep.
So
But it happens all the time. I will give Notre Dame a lot of credit, though, for their roster. They are very consistent with the heights and weights, which is always nice to see.
Yep. Yeah, we'll see how it pans out. So anyway, that is definitely going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for being with us today. Hit that like button, folks. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Check out our merch down in the description box below. You can also see a link to our new daily newsletter that goes out. And of course, as always, Ryan, you know what they got to do. It's the message boards. Boards.irishbreak.com. Check that out, folks, and have a phenomenal rest of your day. Thanks for being with us, folks, on the Irish Breakdown podcast.